All right. Well, I guess I'm starting the interview this time versus John because I actually asked John and Margi to join me tonight in a bit of a debrief. Mm-hmm. And I wanted it to have less of an interview feel rather than just a conversation feel.
That's right.
First of all, because we're friends. Mm-hmm. And second of all, because John also had a personal experience in this story as far as traveling to Wichita. And also you've had a family experience now that I can relate to, sadly, a lot more personally than I've always understood your story somewhat and listened to you talk about it, but it's different when you've lived through something similar together. You can talk about it a little bit differently. So that's my introduction, John, to your Mormon Stories episode, whatever.
It was beautiful. It was beautifully done.
And I feel like I'm better rested and better able to talk a week later than I was able to, the days after when I was just really recovering mostly from sleep deprivation. So, Yeah. So thank you for joining me tonight.
Absolutely.
All right.
I can start with a question that I'm just curious about.
Go for it.
Okay. I'm curious about how you were feeling leading up to flying to Wichita. Like, we kind of met with you earlier in the week. Was it a Tuesday, I think we met, or a Monday maybe that we did the interview?
I think it was Monday.
Was it Monday?
But I'm not probably going to be the best right now with my dates. Mainly because I had received that letter, summoning to this council, or at least informing me about the council. I don't even know that summoning is really the right word. It was kind of like, so we're having this council, kind of with or without you. Mm-hmm. If you want to show up, this is when it's happening. That's kind of how it felt. Yeah. It wasn't like an invitation, really.
Yeah.
Oh, and if you want, you can have people come on your behalf or write letters. But it wasn't like, we'd like to invite you to come and have a conversation. It wasn't like that. So I guess I'm going to call it an announcement letter versus a summoning letter.
Mm. Yeah.
That happened, like people know, on Easter. And then that first week, I really just... I reached out to John and to Greg Prince. Well, John, you put me in touch with Greg Prince. Jana, for example, and Jody England, who ended up being witnesses for me. Like, we were all making a lot of phone calls and trying to, press pause. And it was all happening so quickly. And I kind of figured I didn't realize it would be quite as popular of a story as I think it has become. And popular is probably the wrong word, but you know what I mean, having as much reach. But I knew it would have, every time we've seen this happen, it hasn't been healthy for our community. Right? There's people who double down. There's people who resign. There's people who are triggered by their own ways that they relate to the people in the storylines. I mean, so I really wanted to avoid all that. So I spent my first week kind of, in my own kind of grief, but it's not like, I wasn't shocked. I mean, I think I've been pretty open that ever since I wrote that first blog that I felt was fairly controversial as far as taking a public position against maybe church understandings, was the masturbation blog that I wrote many years ago. Right. So I'd always been kind of in this tension within myself, am I going too far? How much are they going to let me talk openly about, which then of course would make me angry because I'm like, I should be able to talk openly about my public my professional opinions and the statistics I see and my own anecdotal experience. But I've been in that tension for a long time, and I've had other repercussions like LDS Family Services refusing to refer to me, bishops talking behind my back in my stake, all in whatever those meetings are called, where all the bishops and the stake presidents get together and basically say, don't refer to Sister Helfer anymore. So I knew all those things were happening. I could also tell that my clientele was changing over time. Like as I would write on my blog, probably more Orthodox believers would feel less comfortable with me because they could notice that tension between doctrinal understandings and my professional expertise in these particular areas, right? So I want to be clear, it's not like I was talking badly about everything or opposing everything. I think I've always been very clear that there's a lot of healthy principles and gospel doctrine understandings. But in this area of sexuality and in the area of people leaving the church, I see a lot of problems. And why do I continue to see people coming in without saying anything about it, trying to change a system that's causing all the people to come in to begin with? But so that tension has been there for a long time. And I will say that I was prepared. I remember when I wrote that masturbation blog, I was scared. I was like, this could mean that I could be brought in, and who knows, they could excommunicate me about that. So that was a very painful decision to make at that time, but I had to, I don't know, there's like this little Mormon girl in me that's like, do what is right, let the consequence follow. That you all taught me. You all taught me that. That principle, right? Or do what is right. Stand, be willing to stand up for things that are true. I mean, we get all those messages, and when it's in alignment with what they're wanting us to choose and stand up for, then you're praised for that, right? Yeah. Like, how many times did I stand up to my peers in high school saying, no, I'm not going to drink the beer. I'm not going to try the marijuana. Right. So if the church leaders saw me standing up for that, they'd be like, good job, Natasha. But basically those same principles led to my professional advocacy, that I started feeling unethical being quiet.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it didn't come as a surprise that I'm in this situation. I was still probably a little bit surprised at my own emotional reaction to it, since I had been prepared for so long. And I was also surprised that there wasn't more willingness to have conversations before this, you know, like I would have felt, I think, better about this decision, this parting of ways, if we could have had maybe at least 1 to 2 hour conversations, either with, the stake president in Kansas, or much preferably my leaders here. I would have rather my leaders here have taken the time to get to know me and what I'm about and why I feel the way I do. And if at that point, if I felt like I had been heard, and they're like, you know what, we hear you, we can see you're a good person, but this still isn't going to work. I think I would have been sad still, but I think I would have been like, well, at least we went through the process, right? We went through the process of trying to understand each other. So I was surprised. What was your original question? What was it like leading up to it? So by Monday, when I did ask the two of you to just kind of help me tell my story, because I did have all these questions. They had given me questions that they were concerned about, but there was never really an opportunity for me to address those questions. And so I asked you to help me address those questions that I knew were not going to take 40 minutes to address, and turned into a 3.5 hour conversation, right? Which is short for you, John, right? Like it wasn't 8 hours. So anyway, I was sad about that. And then I was surprised by the unwillingness to just share information, basic information. Like, because then I felt like, okay, I tried for the first week to get this to stop. It's obviously not stopping. Okay, that's so now I have to reach out and tell people, are you willing to write a letter of support? I didn't ask anybody, by the way, to witness for me except for Andy, because he was in Kansas. I didn't expect anybody, including you, John, to come to this event, because first of all, I know it's expensive to travel to a smaller airport like Wichita, Kansas. It's not like traveling to Chicago or San Francisco. It's always more expensive to travel to the smaller places. And we had like 6 days. So everybody knows that you always get a travel ticket at least 2 weeks in advance if you want to make it reasonable.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing like the people who traveled probably paid somewhere between $500 to $700 to get there, because normally it's like almost $400 for me to travel to Wichita from Salt Lake City. And there's no direct route from Salt Lake. It's a mess, right? So I didn't ask. So all my witnesses approached me and just
Got it.
either just informed me. Like, I think, John, you're like, oh yeah, I just bought my ticket and I'll be there. And I'm like, oh, of course you weren't a witness, but you were going to support, right? But the people who were willing to be a witness just said, I'm willing to do that. And we're already looking into tickets and we're just going to do it. So, so that was a surprise to me, but yeah, like simple things, right? Like, so, for example, I didn't know that I would only have an hour until I asked for my 7th witness, I think. So I think it was Andy and the 5 women. Is that correct? And then the 7th witness, which I already had decided would be the final one, because I was starting to also worry about how much time there would be. And I didn't want to, have the stake presidency have to be there for 4 hours or anything. So it wasn't like I was expecting 4 or 3 hours. I was expecting like my witnesses to be able to take up about half an hour to 45 minutes. And then I was expecting to be able to have about an hour. That was my expectation before I understood anything.
Yeah.
And then, so when I asked for my 7th witness, that's when, I guess I'm just going to call him Steve. When Steve told me, actually, you're only going to have an hour, so I'm going to, not approve this last witness.
Right.
Which I don't totally trust anyway. I think the fact that my last witness was an attorney by trade, which I disclosed because I didn't want to come across as sneaky, because the letter says you can't have legal representation. But he wasn't coming as legal representation. He just happens to be an attorney. So I had disclosed that, trying to be just very honest and upfront. My feeling is that that's why he was not approved. And then I did also reach out later privately and say, this is the only witness that I have that really represents the LGBTQ community. So I'm asking you to consider this again, because I think it's important to allow, somebody who represents that community to witness for me. So I asked twice I even said I'm willing to take away one of my other witnesses, even though they had already purchased travel tickets. I even said, I'm willing to explain to one of my other witnesses if you can instead put Paul Shipp in, and he still denied that. So there was a lot of rigidity and a lot of weirdness that I had never experienced. I mean, I've served as a Relief Society president. I've served in the Young Women's presidencies. I've served as a teacher. Like, I know what it's like to get permission and, can we meet as sisters? Is there going to be somebody who can preside? There's always, is there going to be a man in the building while we're having homemaking? Right? I know that there's always protocol, right, that we have.
Yeah.
And so I just really wanted to understand what the protocol was, so that, because I've never been through anything like this. And maybe people think that because we're friends, or because I'm friends with the Youngs, or that I'm in the know, that I knew all these details from all of you and that I should know what to expect. But, with all of you, we've all just talked about these things very more from an emotional perspective, and from what was that like for you? And not so what did you have to sign? And what did you bring or not bring? And were you able to be in the lobby or not? Those, I have
Yeah.
I still don't know those things tonight about your experience. I'm going to ask you those questions. Were you allowed into the lobby and able to use the restroom, or because I think your dad was a witness, if I remember correctly. Did they make your dad sit outside in the curb while you were in there? Like, do you remember? What was it like for you guys? For you?
Yeah. I mean, basically, we had 5 witnesses. We all were, there were several men, several had like earpieces and wires, kind of like Secret Service. There were definitely.
Oh, so they had recording devices.
What's that?
So they had recording devices.
Well, they had kind of these.
Or at least communicative devices.
Like Secret Service communication devices where they had earpiece and the little squirrely wire down the thing.
Wow.
But they escorted us in to the Relief Society room. And so we sat in the Relief Society room. You can tell me if you remember it differently.
You had access to a bathroom. You had access to a chair.
We had access to a chair. I don't.
No, we were. It was me and Margie and the 5 witnesses sitting in the Relief Society room. They brought us water. And yeah,
that was nice.
People.
Water would have been nice.
Yeah. And people were allowed to use the restroom if they needed it. They did. We were the first ever. I was the first ever where they brought out these. They didn't send us the releases beforehand. They brought out these sheets of paper that basically said, when you sign this, you're agreeing not to record the proceedings.
And they didn't tell you about that before you got there.
No, because we were the first that ever happened to. I think ever.
Okay.
And
so again, it wasn't you walked into that building not knowing that you would have to sign.
No, they may have. I don't remember if they told us that in documents beforehand or not.
Okay.
I wouldn't be surprised if they had said for recording is forbidden kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I don't remember being super surprised that we were asked to sign those papers. I think we both agreed to sign them. I still had planned to record anyway, honestly, and Margie asked me not to. So I didn't record my disciplinary counsel. And then we were escorted in to the disciplinary counsel.
Oh, wait.
Oh, go ahead.
They came in with a basket and asked for us to put our phones in the basket.
That's right.
I was surprised by that.
Yeah.
That was not in any of the, I did not understand that we would be turning in our phones.
And so we did turn in our phones. And
so they asked you to, and where did that basket go? Like, did they have access to it? Did they just set it aside? Did you know where your phones were?
I don't think we saw that. But
so your personal property was confiscated and you don't know what like they could have done something to those phones as far as, I mean, I'm not saying that they do that, but you have no idea what happened to those phones.
Yeah. And that's why, that's why I thought that they might not let you use your phone because they had made us turn our phones in.
And you had mentioned that to me once, I think during the weekend. But I was like, well, I read the paperwork and it doesn't say specifically a phone. Plus the only recording I really know of, and I hope he doesn't mind us talking about it, but Jeremy Reynolds. Mm-hmm. And so I'm guessing he also was asked to turn off his phone. I don't know. But I guess what's silly to me is that, like, if you really want to do a recording, you're probably not going to use your phone.
Yeah.
Like, there's lots of recording devices. And especially if I would have known that, if I would have known for sure they're going to want my phone and I wanted to really record, I would have not cared to hand over my phone.
Yeah.
I would have been like, sure. And because I would have already had something going. I don't really know how all those things work, but so that's what seems so silly to me. Like if I would have wanted to bring in my computer, well, my computer has ability to record if I figure it out somehow. I don't consider a computer a recording device.
Yeah. And
basically I was agreeing. And I also remember wondering, well, do I really bring in paper? Because it says you can't even do a written recording. So because I was thinking about it, I was like, because sometimes when people talk to me, like obviously as a therapist, even when people talk to me, I take a few notes because I'm not going to remember everything you said to me in the last 10 minutes. So then I can refer to my notes and then answer questions or like that's a very typical thing a therapist will do. So I had thought ahead of time, I bet you if I do that, like if I'm, as if I'm listening to them and I take a few notes where I want to address some things, they're not going to let me do that because they're going to be like, oh, no, you can't write anything down. So I was already in that space where I probably can't bring paper. My computer had broken. I had all my notes in my, I use my notes app on my cell phone for everything. You can go look at it. It has like 7 bajillion notes, probably way too many. I need to go in and organize my own notes. But I thought that's where I'm going to, and I even thought, if they want to see what I'm doing with my phone, it's right there. I can say, look, I'm just on my notes, so I wasn't that concerned about the phone thing really.
Mm-hmm.
There's a few interesting comments. We're live streaming to Facebook.
Yeah.
Heidi writes, hell no to anybody touching my phone. That's what Heidi writes.
Right.
And James writes, personally, I'd never subject myself to a process that deprived me of my right to record or have with me my defense. Why must they insist on operating in darkness?
Right.
What do they have to hide? What happened to do what is right, then come what may? And the reason why, just the reason why I felt like it was important to record stuff is because I'd watched with Kate Kelly, her say that things that they were saying to her in private were different than what they were saying in public. And I had seen other people get smeared, like Simon Southerton and others, that, where they're really doing it for reasons that are embarrassing to them. And so they try and pass it off as an issue of personal worthiness when really it's things embarrassing to them. And so just for the record, I agree with what James writes. You record for your own defense.
Mm-hmm.
So that they can't misrepresent what's really happening. And I'm so glad I did record our interactions with my stake president leading up to it because they didn't listen to the disciplinary council. In my case, the decision was already made.
Yeah.
But
as I feel like it was for me as well.
Yeah.
But I was able to get him on record for why he was calling my bishop and my stake president, why they were convening it.
Right.
And then the New York Times published that. And for me, I was just glad there was a record that it really was my support of same-sex marriage, my support of ordained women, my podcast, that they wanted to silence my podcast, that sort of thing.
Right. Like, for example, if I didn't have that letter that Steve wrote me outlining the questions he had for me, which I appreciated, I asked him to do that. And I wanted to know, like, what is it that you're really wanting to understand here so I can be prepared to talk to you if we're going to have that conversation. I'm really glad I had that because that really showed what they were worried about. Because then later, I think for PR purposes, they're just saying, no, it's not that you support gay marriage or that you talk about masturbation. Right. It's about the fact that you're rude to us and that you said a naughty word and that you that you're in opposition of doctrine. Well, of course, I'm in opposition of doctrinal understandings because I don't agree how you're talking about sex and sexuality and gender identity and all those things. But that doesn't mean that I don't still have a lot of personal meaning about other things in the church, or beliefs or whatever. Anyway, so I agree with that. And normally I wouldn't put myself in those kinds of situations. I was willing to kind of play the game because I was interested in retaining my membership and because I wanted to be a witness to this process. Like if you're really going to be as barbaric as throwing me out of your family, I mean, this is like a kid being thrown out of their home. I want to be a witness to how harmful that is. And I wanted to try to have a conversation. There were a lot of things I wanted to try to do. And exactly for the reasons that you're talking about, John, that this question elicited or this comment is, if you notice in my official response to the church, we're having this council. So then I responded officially. I said, I give you permission to record. And in fact, I think you should, even if it only stays in the archives of the church. Because I would agree, secrecy is not good. Confidentiality is super important when the person at stake needs it to protect themselves.
Right.
Like, I'm a huge confidentiality person. I'm very careful about what I say about clients. Even when I share like anecdotes, like, well, I saw this young woman. Many times I'm lying to you a little bit so that you can't, maybe I saw a young man really, or maybe I'm saying they were 20 when really they were 40, because I do not want any possibility that either the person hearing me is going, oh my gosh, you're talking about me, or that a person could be like, I think they're talking about so-and-so, right? Even if I don't share a name. Confidentiality is really important. But any client of mine, and this happens to me all the time, like at Sunstone or whatever, right? Like there's lots of people who are like, this is my therapist. I love her, And even that makes me a little uncomfortable just because I'm like, oh my gosh, people know I'm their therapist now. But that's their prerogative.
That's right.
If they're comfortable saying that I'm their therapist or that I help them in such and such a way, or that whatever they heard from me was helpful, well, then now that confidentiality is breached by the person who matters.
Yeah.
Because they're actually not supposed to protect me. And in fact, if I do harm in my therapy office, there's an accountability board. And I actually say that in all of my informed consents. If I do something or say something that you feel has harmed your relationship or that you think is unethical, that I've practiced in some malpractice type of way, you're to call Doppel here in Utah, the BSRB in Kansas, and they will investigate me. Yeah. So my confidentiality never matters in that room. So it does beg the question, why are they so worried about confidentiality? Because I think for a long time they tried to say, well, we're protecting the member. We're protecting the member. We can't say anything. And they're actually right when the member doesn't want anything to be said, right? Like if they're excommunicating somebody for infidelity or gay marriage or, whatever those things are. A lot of people are like, if you say anything about this, they could get sued. Now, granted, our church history doesn't have that. We used to, in our church history, over the pulpit publicize, like tell everybody, by the way, brother so-and-so was excommunicated yesterday because he's been cheating on his spouse, right? Or so there was kind of like this legacy that we have of public humiliation that we actually still do in less overt ways. Like you can't pass the sacrament. Well, why is that boy not passing the sacrament? Susie Q didn't go to the temple with her young women's group, right? Or dad is standing outside the temple during the marriage, right, of their kid.
The circle of the ordination.
Or you can't be in the blessing, right? So we do still have these public shaming markers that people notice something is off. And we definitely have a culture that tends to assume the reasons are sexual. You usually aren't like, I wonder if he was like frauding people financially. No, people are usually like, I wonder if he was looking at porn, or I wonder if he had an affair, or I wonder if she, got together with her high school boyfriend, or, that's the gossip that's either happening in person or in the psyche of a personal space, even if you're not talking about it publicly. So that's our culture, right? That's what we come from.
Yeah.
Public humiliation is a big part of it.
We actually had that in our letter. So
tell me, like, what do you mean?
So when we got the letter that we were being called. Well, John was being called. I say we.
I think it is a we.
It feels like a we.
Yes, but, I think it is a we.
For the disciplinary council, there was a statement in there. And this is what's so puzzling is there are things in common, but it also appears that there's really there's no, what's it called? Like a uniform way that there's just enough variability for it to feel chaotic to the person it's happening to, where you can't really prepare or really entirely know.
Yeah.
But we had already talked about kind of doing it in secret if it ever happened
Just
to us.
resigning.
Just resigning. And in the letter it said if we resigned, they would announce it from in the stake. So then we were like, now it can't be private, actually. Now our kids can't continue to go to church, and it's just something that we kind of know, and because our kids were all active. So we had the public shaming. We knew if we resigned, they would still announce it, and all the people we knew would know.
And this week, we interviewed Kyle and Nisha Brost from Kansas, and they resigned. Because they didn't want the public humiliation and the shame that goes with being tagged as an apostate. But it does go back to this idea that a cult, and I'm not saying the church is a cult, I'm just saying there's this saying that says a cult is any institution that won't let you leave with your dignity intact. And it seems like the purpose of excommunication is, the primary purpose is to flag you to the membership as being bad and dangerous and dirty and evil and unworthy. And they're going to get you one way or the other. Either you'll make a public stink out of it, and then that will advertise that they've designated you as scary and dangerous and evil and bad. Or if you choose to keep it private, they'll spread the word. So there's no way to just kind of quietly fade.
How does that, I mean, that's really interesting because that wasn't in my letter and I didn't realize that was in yours. How does that fly with their whole confidentiality thing where they say like, well, we're not allowed to talk to anybody about why?
Like Margie said, the rules are always changing.
There's enough variability.
Like them not letting them in and not letting them go to the bathroom. Even the temple recommend holding witnesses weren't allowed to go in the building and use the restroom.
So we can get into that.
So they're just changing.
Ask you.
I mean, I think that honestly, they're just figuring it out. They're changing the name. It's no longer a disciplinary council. They're not calling it. They're just, we're basically, this is all real time. I mean, I mentioned this before. When I saw the September 6th happen back in 1993, I was traumatized, but I was more traumatized by how that sent a chill of silence through Mormonism for the next 10 plus years.
Right.
And so I resolved, if this ever happens again, we're not going to just like mouse away quietly. We're going to shine a spotlight. We're going to make it a sacrament. We're going to make it a celebration. We're going to make it a public relations event so that the church, so that the world will see what the church does to people, and so that they don't just silence people and intimidate people.
Right.
And so I think, with Kate's and then mine and then Denver Snuffer and Bill Reel and the Youngs and Sam Young and all the others, they're just like, they're saying, well, what did they do this time? Well, let's make some tweaks. Okay, now what did they do this time? Oh, let's make some tweaks. And so they're changing it real time as we're responding real time.
Right.
Like when I came up to the window to film you guys this time, because I'd filmed them in the past, I'd even stuck the camera up against the window so you could see who some of the people were. That guy was right there to say, you get off the property with your camera. That was new. They had never
Leah,
before,
you had done that at Leah's.
but they had never like said, you get off our property like the guy did.
Exactly. He was like ready.
So they're trying to learn and adapt, but that's why it's changing. That's all I'm saying.
So I have a few just responses to some of the things. See, and I'm not taking notes. I hope I remember all the responses I have. First of all, it saddens me that we're able to give each other this support when we're public figures, but I'm thinking of all the people that are in this same situation who don't have a blog or don't have a podcast. And so we don't know that this is happening to them. So I'm just going to throw out there an idea, like, could we have like a website or some place where people who need support, who aren't famous or public, could reach out and say, hey, I need some support. I'm going through this issue. So that's just a thought I'm having. Maybe somebody can pick up on that and run with it. The other thing that I just noticed as you talked about the cult stuff, that's a big trigger word, and I think in all religions. What's the difference between a religious organization and a cult? And there's some very extreme examples I think most of us would be comfortable calling a cult, like when the whole congregation dies of suicide, right? Because somebody told them it's time to go to heaven or something like that. But I just want to point out that I'm not interested in calling the church a cult. And I see even you're very quick, John, to say, I'm not saying the church is a cult. But just like depression and just like anxiety and just like addiction, there's actually criteria. There's criteria that people have put together, again, bodies of people, not just one person, that have decided what is cult-like or cultish behavior. So whether you, like for example, there's like probably like 10 different criteria for depression. And you only need like 3 or 4 of them to be diagnosed with depression, right? So you don't need to fit every single criteria. You may still have a sex drive and still have hopelessness and suicidal ideation, right? So you can still suffer from depression without every single bullet point. So I really think that our community needs to start like talking about what is the criteria that bodies outside of Mormonism and that aren't really even interested in Mormonism per se, but that are just noticing like this criteria that you just said, that the community makes it difficult to leave without a kind of a shunning, like the Amish shun you. Like you can't ever talk to your mother again, right? If you leave. We're not that severe in Mormonism, but we do have traits of that, right? We have there's mild and moderate and severe depression. Well, I think there's mild and moderate and severe cultish behavior. Yeah. And so I would just say, I think it would be healthy for us as a community to kind of start understanding what that criteria is and not shy away from, oh my gosh, don't call the church a cult. I don't really want to call the church a cult either. I think that we're a valid religion, a religious community. But I do think that we have behaviors and traditions that are not healthy. And so that's just another thought. Somebody post the criteria for cults, and let's just have...
There's a great book called Combating Cult Mind Control by Stephen Hassan. And he actually, you can Google right now, undue influence continuum. And he's got the BITE model where he talks about behavior. Cults control your behavior. They control the information you receive. They control your thoughts, and then they manipulate you with emotion. And then he goes into each of those BITE and gives a detailed explanation of the different criteria. But then he's got this influence continuum because they're, in theory, are benign cults and then harmful cults. And so, there is a really good framework for this.
Like almost every religion is going to use emotion.
Yeah.
Businesses use emotion. Advertising uses emotion, right?
Military, government.
Right. So it's not like, I don't want to say like, oh my gosh, we're the only ones. No, but we need to like address this in a thoughtful way. And be open to that.
And to be clear, I think all of us, even the ones who are out of the church, just want the church to be less harmful. Like if we could make the church completely cult-free, I think we would all agree, like no symptoms. We would all be glad because it would mean that the church would be harming no one.
Right.
So I think that's one of our goals is that the church just harm no one, and we're giving it lots of feedback so that it.
And I think that that's a common goal.
Yeah.
I think when we do mixed faith marriage work, where do we start? We start by helping them understand you probably still have a lot in common, right? What are your common goals, your common values? Like a non-believing spouse and a believing spouse, they're probably both going to really want to parent their children well.
Yeah.
So let's figure out how you can do that still, So anyway.
That's right. So leading up to the actual council and you getting to Kansas, you were feeling, it sounds like, were you aware that the communication was off and not direct? And that getting the details was kind of an arduous...
Yes.
Okay,
like I'm saying, the only communication I was given where they gave me information was that first letter telling me about the council.
Everything else.
They didn't tell me what, like even the witnesses, you can have witnesses. So I had to ask, well, does that mean that I could invite, because I thought I could invite one of my friend's professors who taught me marriage and family therapy. They're most of them were Christian and really great professors at Friends University. And was that an adequate witness, or did it have to be a temple recommend holder? So I asked those questions, and the first thing I got was member in good standing. Well, I didn't even know what that meant. What's a member in good standing? Does that mean they have to have a temple recommend? Does that mean they have to have a calling? Does that mean that they're just members without any disciplinary action? It ended up being members without any disciplinary action. It didn't require a temple recommend to be a witness. But I only had that information because I asked. So if I had shown up with, like, for example, Dr. Dan Lord, who actually came to my vigil. So Dan, if you see this, thank you. I have so much respect for that man, and Steve Rathbun, and just the faculty there at Friends was just so wonderful and loving. Let's say I would have brought him. They could have dismissed the whole thing just because I brought Dr. Dan Lord, and I wouldn't have known.
Yeah. I
wouldn't have even known that was a no-no, right? And I asked about I was given the signature page, and the directions there were, please send this page to all your witnesses. Mm-hmm. So they didn't communicate with my witnesses. I did. I was given that task to communicate with the witnesses. After they were approved, by Steve. And I did that. I sent that page, and I've posted that page on my website or on my Facebook page. And he said, it would be the best option is that you have it signed by everybody and you bring it to the council. And if you don't do that, we will have a copy that will make you sign before you come in. So if you bring it or not, you're not coming in without signing that. So I got that message loud and clear. And I wanted to make the message loud and clear that we signed it. So we were very mindful about that. And I actually put somebody else in charge of that because that's a typical thing I would normally forget. Like I almost didn't make it to my wedding with my wedding license. That's the kind of person I am. I'm a little flighty. So I gave that job to somebody else. and we received that document on Thursday. One of the witnesses had it printed, and we all signed it on probably Saturday, or I think we had it signed and ready to go by Saturday. But then I messed up because I was on the phone with somebody and wanting to take some notes. So I just grabbed a piece of paper and started writing on the back of it. And Jody's like, well, there goes our witness statement. So then they had to go print it off again, and we all signed it again. And it was just kind of one of those, again, I'm a little kooky and I was sleep deprived, and I'm not, organizational skills are not my
stressful.
Yeah. Organizational skills are not my strength to begin with. So that's the story of the paper. And when I went in, because remember they were only letting us in one at a time, and they didn't ask us for that paper. Like the gentleman who came out, and again rudely, it's not like he said, "Hello, Sister Helfer." No, he's like, "We'll take you in first." That's pretty much how he addressed me. So there was no like hello or welcome or sorry to keep you waiting. They didn't keep us waiting, but outside, there was no explanation why we couldn't go into the building. Right. We'll see you first, was what I got. He didn't say, do you have the witness statement, or do you have the recording statement? He didn't say anything. So I just went in. I didn't have it. I think Jody or Jana had it in their hands. And right there on the table was they were wanting me to sign it. And I was perturbed. I was like, no. We already have it. We have it ready for you. Please invite them in one at a time. Well, then you go out and get it. I wanted to be clear that we had come prepared.
Yeah.
So this little sign it again, I was like, come on.
Yeah.
Are we in kindergarten or middle school? This feels like a middle school fight.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say much about my poor family because they're already so tired about me being public, but it's kind of it seemed like a middle school fight.
Right. Right. Well, in a power,
there was all this hoopla. Ooh, there's going to be a big fight. Everybody meet at this place. And then for little reasons, they weren't willing to engage, which.
Interesting. I was going to have Natasha back up for a minute and just talk about briefly your emotions leading up to and kind of the few days before. I know you can even talk about the rallying and who showed up, because I noticed you did some interviews that were pretty amazing with
Oh, yeah.
That we were talking about. And just what surprised you in those days, the booing, if you felt buoyed by the people, and then just your emotions and the toll it takes. I think that's something we definitely, I guess maybe in my Mormon transitions a little bit, but we never really spoke to that as a couple, so that people can kind of get a sense for what it feels like.
Yeah, and this was what was really difficult for me, is that even positive emotion is exhausting.
Yeah.
Right? So because I drew some boundaries with even the people that were at the vigil that had traveled and probably wanted to say hello or give me a hug or, just little things that people want to offer. And I knew that every hug would be difficult, and because I would want to engage and I would want to look in their eyes and say thank you. And I knew I just didn't have that bandwidth by Sunday. Yep. So I felt really bad, but I'm really grateful that people seemed to understand that I just, I waved at them while I was preparing to go in, and I really felt this profound love from them. And I figured they'd get more from talking to each other anyway. Like they're getting to know other people, right? So I thought that was great. But yeah, so I did notice that the first week I was feeling a lot of grief and fear and sadness and anger, right? Those were a lot of the feelings that first week when I was just trying to shut the whole thing down. The second week, by the time I came here on Monday night and by the time I had made my Facebook, because even before talking to you, I had made like a 20-minute just announcement that this was happening. I felt a lot of acceptance at that point, like, okay, this is going down. And I'd kind of cried all that stuff away that first week. So now what I felt was, I felt acceptance on Monday and Monday, I think, or Sunday night when I said, this is happening, and when I talked to you all. But then very quickly after that, as I saw the outpouring of love and I saw the people. Oh, and by the way, on Sunday, Sunday was very intentional for me. Sunday, I made it a very ritualistic Sunday, the Sunday before I announced anything. So I went to the mountains. It was the last day of skiing. I know a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, she broke the Sabbath. But for me, that was like my Sabbath to go skiing. There's a lot of spirituality in that for me. It ties me to my father and my grandmother who taught me that. And we've always loved the mountains. And to me, it was just like being in a temple in of itself. I had a great day. I had my music in my ear. I was kind of dancing and skiing, which is a little bit dangerous. And I fell badly. And I have this huge bruise still on my leg. And at first I was like, oh, what a sad thing for this day. But then it was like, no, I'm having a fabulous day. And I fell flat on my face, which is not typical for me. And not because I'm bragging, but because I'm very careful about not falling, because I've fallen before and I had to have my ACL recovered. So I'm very scared. I have this kind of like very cautious way of skiing now.
Right.
But I fell flat on my face and I had this huge bruise and it hurt, but still had that symbolism of like, and yet I can still have a great rest of my day and I can still have a good time. And it really kind of was symbolic to what was happening to me. Like here I am kind of bruised and hurt, and I can still get up and do what I do, which is dance and ski.
That's right.
So I did that. And then later that afternoon and evening, I went over to Jody England's home. I haven't asked for an official priesthood blessing in a very long time because, again, my relationship with men in the church in particular, as they're monitoring whether or not I'm worthy, has been difficult for a long time for me. But her beautiful husband, Mike, who's a dear friend and who has earned my trust many, many times over, gave me a beautiful blessing. I wanted kind of a traditional blessing to honor my Mormon spirituality and rituals that I've been through so many of those. And then I had the circle of women who prayed on my behalf. Jody and Jana and several others who joined us even on Zoom were there to do that with me. So I was very intentional that I stayed off social media, which I'm a big social media girl. I love to scroll and stuff. So that was hard, but I stayed away from that. I gathered my children around and talked to them about what to expect, that I wasn't going to be a very good mother for a few days. That they had to step it up, and that's okay because they're teenagers and they know how to make cereal and peanut butter sandwiches, and they can walk down to Del Taco. So I just kind of gave them a little good resilience talk. Julie Diaz-Avedo Hanks would be proud of me, right? Because she's always saying, your kids don't need you to do everything for you.
Go, Julie. Go, Julie.
So I had a very intentional Sunday to really gather my peace, that I was going to be accepting whatever happens. I was not hopeful. I wasn't getting the signal I was getting the signal that the decision was made because of the letter. Right. It wasn't an invitational letter. It wasn't like, let's have a chat. Let's see. No, it's like, we're holding a council with or without you. And, there had been I had asked again that prior week to talk to my local leaders, all that. No. Okay. So I had like maybe a 2% hope at that point that I would retain my membership. But I was you never know. People can surprise you. So I was in a very accepting place by Monday. But then came all the support.
Right.
So then I had all these other emotions, the weeping that you saw prior to the Sunday council was mostly just awe, gratitude. And not only that, it was also a bit of vicarious trauma, because as I was getting all of these thousands of letters came in from the entire spectrum of Mormonism.
Yeah.
Like acting bishops to people who were F. Daily or an occult type of letter, that's the spectrum of letters that were coming in, and not even one here and 500 over here no, it was fairly equal, fairly equul. And that's a 5-year project now, is to figure out what to do with all those letters. Cause I really want to honor, if people want, I will not do anything without people's consent, but if people want that recorded as part of this moment that happened in history, in our little Mormon history, I was reading a lot of really difficult stories.
Yeah.
And I even took a break. I kind of got to a point where I'm like, I don't think I can read any more of these, because I was having the response that a lot of us as therapists have. Therapists and coaches, we have to do a lot of self-care because we're dealing with vicarious trauma as we hold space for the wounds, that are showing up in our rooms. So
okay.
So I was feeling all of that, and I was starting to get sleep deprived, and I was very motivated. I had all these ideas. I'm like, I got the letter from the professionals. I'm like, oh my gosh.
That was such an amazing idea.
And it wasn't just a little letter. It was
masterful,
journal worthy references to literature. I was shocked, because when Lisa said, can we write a letter? I thought it'd be kind of like a page, like this, we support Natasha. A lot of us have similar positions. Please don't go through with this. Signatures. That's kind of what I expected.
Yeah.
And in just 3 or 4 days, they came up with that masterpiece, which I think a lot of the credit goes to Lisa Hansen. I got an interview with a lot of the female.
I saw that.
Yeah, a lot of the female LDS therapists who were part of writing it.
Yep.
So did I need to do that week? Probably not. Maybe it would have been better to do that 3 weeks from now. They probably would have still come on, but I was feeling this fire or flow or motivation, oh my gosh, how did this go down? I wanted to know how it went down. So who wants to come talk about it?
And did you feel kind of seizing the moment?
And seizing the moment, and also part of this transparency goal that I had.
Right.
Right? Because I think our people need more transparency. I think we need to understand what's happening and why and who are the players and how do other people feel about it. Because it wasn't like, I know because I've gone to all these conferences with all these colleagues of mine that we're all worried about this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So I didn't want it to be a Natasha versus Steve fight.
Right.
I wanted it to really shine a light on, no, these are much bigger issues. It's playing out in my life personally, and there's a personal side to that, but no, this really has like really big implications. And all my friends and my best friends who are my colleagues are also worried about these things and are also managing how they language things. And a lot of them are really better at it than I am. And that's why they're not in trouble, because they're very eloquent and they're very thoughtful. I'm more feisty, right? So I kind of say things how I feel them in the moment. But people like Kristen Hodson and Jennifer Finlayson-Fife and even Julie D'azevedo, and I'm like, I listen to them, Lisa Hansen, and I'm like, how do they speak so well? You know, like they just have this beautiful language. Like we all come with our different strengths, right? And I've always really had a lot of respect for people who I was just listening to Kristen Hodson on NPR with Doug Fabrizio right before I came here. And listening to her talk about this whole dilemma, and even me, I'm like, why are you so brilliant? Friend of mine. How you have a way to talk about this that I have my way, and I'm guessing my way is also like valuable,
important.
And people listen to my languaging but she has a way that even I'm like, I'm like, I wouldn't have even thought of saying it that way.
Right.
So anyway,
I have to ask about that because it's also a matter. Tell me if I'm wrong. I'm hearing you frame it a bit as a matter of eloquence, or someone's gift for being articulate. Mm-hmm. I wonder if there's also an element of strategy because something that I've often felt is that silence is the killer. In other words, you could. When I was active in church but totally progressive, I was feeling a lot of guilt and shame that I was benefiting with my privilege from all the things I was enjoying. My kids being able to be in young men's and young women's, and me being able to enjoy whatever. And then I'm thinking about LGBT people who might be dying by suicide, or trans people that don't feel welcome or getting kicked out of this or that service, or just all the ways that people get hurt. Mm-hmm. And I realized that to just stay silent, and even just to stay silent except for the clients that I worked with, I felt like I couldn't do it. I felt like the tax I had to pay to maintain my integrity and to not and to sort of speak up for the fact that the church was taking same-sex marriage away from people in California, the whole Prop 8 thing. I just felt like I couldn't stay active in the church and also stay silent. And so for me, it was a matter of like being bad for my mental health to try and just be silent publicly. And so it's a decision you have to make. And I think we're seeing Julie and Jennifer speak out now, and they've always spoken out in their own ways. But isn't there kind of a continuum of how much you want to stay silent publicly to kind of stay in good graces versus speak out, but speak truth to power and speak out for the marginalized?
Yeah.
Is that at all part of it for you? Was it part of it for you?
Well, I think that
Did you just have a different strategy than Julie or Jennifer, basically?
So strategy, I think, is a strong word, although I do think that it's an appropriate word in some ways. I think, in Ethics 101, as we all go to graduate school, I think we start wrestling with this issue. How public am I going to be? Like, I know a lot of therapists who are like, I don't want people knowing where I live. I don't want people knowing anything about my children. I don't want people, because we work with a population, and especially depending on the population you work with. I mean, my father's a psychiatrist, for example. Their house was vandalized twice by a client who was upset. Like when you're dealing with people in mental health issues, you have a wide variety of people who are dealing with trauma, who are dealing with very serious diagnoses like schizophrenia or personality disorders. So there are therapists who are very mindful that I'm willing to step into this work, but only in a private way, because I have to protect myself, not just from a church but from my safety, from my personal safety and from my children's safety.
Yeah, absolutely.
I will never forget, a lot of people don't know this story, but I received a package one time. And if the person who's listening to me is listening to me, I hope that they understand that I share this now with a lot of love and grace, because I think we were able to really make good amends. So I don't mean to share this story in a shaming way. But I received a package that had, when I opened it, it had materials in it that made me wonder if I wasn't in danger, like from a pipe bomb type of thing. And I'll never forget my reaction to that. And I kicked it as far as I could into my lawn. And I went into really panic mode. And it was a few years after I had started the blog, the Mormon Therapist blog. And I cannot tell you, I felt it took the police in Wichita 4 days to find out who had sent it. And believe it or not, it caught the attention even of the police guy who was in charge of getting the serial killer in Wichita that now escapes my name. There's a famous serial killer that was based in Wichita. So I called the police. It was a female officer who came out, and she immediately called that team after seeing what was in that package. So I went through 5 days of locking all the doors, closing all the blinds, sleeping with my children. My children were a lot younger, and going, what have I done?
Yeah.
What, in starting this blog, I have now put myself in a public space where, who knows who
Exactly.
can misinterpret my words. And we have scary stories in Mormonism, right? That are like the whole Nephi story, Nephi killing Laban. There are people that can take that through their own mental health lens and their own trauma lens and see it as something very honorable to get rid of somebody who is causing damage to the overall population. We have that in our Mormon story. I mean, there's a famous book that came out talking about murders of a brother and his sister-in-law, or Under the Banner of Heaven. That's a story that talks about how these interpretations can sometimes lead to very dangerous events. So I think we all have strategy to keep ourselves safe, to keep our families safe. I think we also all have strategy in regards to how we are approachable to clients. In fact, we're taught those strategies. In other words, I can't go into a Muslim community and say, I think you're all oppressed by wearing your
burqas or hijabs.
Yeah. And I don't think that that's healthy for your feminism powers. And it's my mental health, responsibility to tell you that this isn't a healthy space for you. First of all, that's not even how a lot of Muslim women think about wearing the hijab. And it would be completely inappropriate of me, whether I thought I had mental health reasons or not, to share that with them. So we are taught strategy from day one in our programs to be respectful to culture, to language, to religion, to values. So we're always playing this dance of, your religion says that masturbation is a sin, but science says it can be a really healthy thing to do at times, right? So I think all of us, whether we're secular therapists or religious therapists, are in that dance of meeting our clients where they're at, respecting where they're coming from, and also maybe seeing how some of where they're coming from isn't maybe the healthiest place from our training perspective.
Yeah.
Super complicated.
But I don't think it's probably fair to say they didn't come after you for whatever you said in private to your clients.
No, they came after me because of public.
And that's the type of thing,
Right.
I think Julie, just to take an example, Julie D'Azevedo-Hanks and Jennifer Finlayson-Fife, my guess is they've been chosen to be way, way more judicious or careful in their public comments. And I'm guessing that was intentional for you to be more direct and to even be overtly critical of certain church policies. True or not true?
Yeah, and I think that we are all needed.
That's
It was
right.
kind of like the Kate Kelly situation with, she was more direct in her approaches. There's a lot of Mormon feminists who take, more discreet
Yep.
ways of advocating for the same thing. And most social justice movements need that spectrum. Because if you're all super direct, then the people who are really, there's going to be a lot of double downing and
Right.
backfire effects.
Right.
You need the people in the middle who people can be like, oh, they're trustworthy enough, which I was feeling like I was trying to do too, right? I mean, yes, I'm more direct than Julie and Jennifer, but I'm not as direct as even other people who are maybe post-Mormon or maybe even from other religions that criticize our Mormon church way loud, about some of these things. Like I go to conferences where the Mormon church is talked about like a hate group. So, and it's not on the official list of hate groups, but organizations where our apostles go and talk are on that hate group. Like some of these family groups, I forget their names, but apostles of ours have gone and talked at organizations that are considered hate groups because of LGBTQ plus issues. So I was trying to do that dance, and this is where I just bring up my own kind of cultural reasoning. Like I have an Argentine mother who won debates at Idaho State University, even though English was her second language 2 years ago against Americans. So, I mean, I come from a very strong, opinionated, not scared to talk mother figure. But then I also come, my father's side is German and English. I come also kind of from this more stoic, intellectual kind of emotion-less or stuffing type of culture. So, I'm guessing Julie and Jennifer and people like Kristen, they have their own styles that come from their personalities and come from their own heritages and their own mothers and fathers and what was modeled. And they do really good work where they are at. And I think that all of those people make some people uncomfortable.
Yeah. And this isn't to judge anyone's strategy or approach at all. But the one thing I do want to say is in my observations of the Mormon church over the past 20 or 30 or 40 or 100 years, if we're going to talk about the church moving the needle and actually, making progress, what caused them to roll back polygamy? It was public pressure. What caused them to allow black men to have the priesthood and black men and women to be able to go in the temple? And it was public pressure, people speaking out. What happened when, Sam Young, for example, started doing marches for the children? All of a sudden the church is allowing parents to sit in on those interviews with their kids. And, whether it's feminist stuff or LGBT stuff, people that speak out help lead the church to change. And people that stay quiet and just work in their own little spheres, they probably have an influence too. But in my observation, the church relies on the outspoken critics to motivate them to receive revelation. And I say that with a little bit of a grin.
I think
we need some humor.
I think this is perfect because I'm going to say a yes and.
Oh, I love your yes ands, Margie.
Because yes, and I think that's super important. And I do love the idea that everyone mends the sort of corner of the fence that's in their reach. Mm-hmm. And so if we're talking about affecting change, yes. But also, like, what if the intention is to relieve suffering along the corner of the fence within their reach? So in the congregations in which they're serving, or, you know, within the communities they're building, and that's what I love about appreciating spectrum. Because you get more intentions. Yeah. And this is all about, right, reducing suffering and doing it in a way that honors our particular gifts, personalities, or that. So I love that, and that's a yes. And I just think everyone's part is important. It's an important piece.
And another and that I would
it's a yes
add
and
to,
and?
Yes, so there's a yes and that I would add to John's thing is that for every one of those things that you mentioned, there were progressive people in the church already talking about those things. Mm-hmm. You know, like the Darius Grays and the I know that there are progressive people on a lot of these committees, even the Correlation Committee, who are talking about these things. And so when these kind of nuanced progressive members who are doing some work from within, mixed with that very strong public pressure,
that's right.
That's a nice equation, a little stew going on. Mm-hmm. To help the movement. Now, you know, I know that the church could care less about my advice, but here's some advice. And I was talking to Jennifer Gonzalez today, by the way. I consulted with her because I think she's much more adept at addressing some of these more systemic issues, and especially from the perspective of white supremacy and patriarchy, these systems, right, that infiltrate so much of our country, regardless of whether it's a religion or a business or the government. But so somebody like that would be, and I'm actually going to podcast with her hopefully in the next few days. But what I think, just from my own little silly perspective, which is not as systemic, is that the church has a real attachment to revelatory power, right? Like they get a lot of their own credibility. Just like I get my credibility from my degrees and from my data and from my anecdotal experience, they get a lot of credibility from being the one and only true church, and for really claiming these revelatory keys and priesthood keys. And so I wish that I feel like they can still claim that, and it's actually a beautiful thing to claim because it means that change is going to be part of our spiritual journey as a church. You know, the idea that you need ongoing revelation. That's a lot of people thought we were blasphemous, right? Like a lot of the Christian traditions at the time of Joseph Smith was like, the canon is the canon. You can't change the canon. Like that's blasphemy. So we actually come from this kind of healthier tradition. And I know that's a little triggering maybe because there's a lot of unhealthy tradition too, but this healthier tradition of there's room for growth, there's room for change, there's room for more doctrine, and there's room for even more scripture, right? So there's a lot of room for. And the community of Christ, I think, has done a really beautiful job of taking this seriously, this, you know, of adding, like they have their Doctrine and Covenants has some of our Doctrine and Covenant stuff, but they've added to it continually as social justice issues come up. And they do ordain their females, and they do have gay marriage and, you know, same gender marriage. And so anyway, I think if I could just give a piece of advice, is there needs to be, first of all, some acceptance or maybe less fear that you'll lose that authority if you listen to other people. Because I think that the only way they see that authority is really, and why we see like the changes after the excommunication of Sam Young. Well, no, Sam Young doesn't have the right to have that revelation. Only we have the right for that revelation. And so we'll get rid of him. But then we'll claim revelatory powers of the changes that were obviously being influenced by other people anyway. So they need to understand that we see that. We're not dumb. We're actually not kindergartners. And so a lot of us struggle to like make sense of that. Like, just own it. Say you're sorry. We can make mistakes and still be a revelatory church. We can own our shiz, and we can listen to the expertise and to the lived experience of people and have the humility. See, that's I think, that's the Christ-like trait that they encourage all of us to have. And that's been a very helpful teaching for me, because I do struggle with humility. I can be very feisty and I'm right and you're wrong and my way or the highway. But so those teachings about humility have been very important for my self-development as a professional, as a mother, as a spouse and a partner. I think they need to take a little bit of their own medicine and mix that in there with, you can still claim keys, you can still claim revelatory power if that's the language you want to use, mixed in with a heavy dose of humility. You could really have a much healthier approach to a lot of these more controversial issues, I think.
Yeah.
But that's, again, more free advice that they usually don't either obviously pay me for or or listen to. But I still give it. I'm willing.
So I hear kind of moving into the council weekend, you feeling a sense of both feeling really grateful and feeling bolstered by the support and feeling overwhelmed and not sleeping
And
a
exhausted.
ton and going into it feeling quite exhausted.
Yeah.
Yes.
And feeling the grief. Really, the grief for me was, this was supposed to be my last weekend with Nicholas, my son, before he graduates from high school. And he was having a lot of fun times and prom, getting ready for prom and getting ready for, he had a track meet that I was so excited to see him at. And I did engage in all those things, but nowhere near as much as I
Right.
wanted to. And he was super gracious, but I could tell he was sad and disappointed at times. And
Yep.
so that was probably the most traumatic thing for me, is that here, because I desperately wanted to be part of this event, but sometimes I wonder, should I have just said I can't do it and I'm going to spend the whole weekend with my kid anyway, so that will probably not me for a while. Okay. At the same time, my kids are resilient. My kids are forgiving.
Yep.
And my kids are awesome, and they have good social networks. So, I go back. Mother guilt is, I always go back to Julie on that one. Every time I have mother guilt now, I think of Julie, looking at me, with her cute little face going, Natasha. And I'm like, okay.
Brilliant. See Julie's influence everywhere.
That's right.
That's great.
So, because she does some really good work on mother guilt and the role of motherhood and how we as mothers, and it's not just Mormon mothers. I mean, this is
that's right.
This is a national catastrophe. Even psychiatry blamed mothers for everything for a long time. Schizophrenia was blamed on mothers. Homosexuality was blamed on too attached mothers. It's not just religion. I mean, my field has harmed people too. So I don't trust my field 100%, but I do trust that we autocorrect a lot better than religion does, because we have processes like the scientific method, and the way you make it as a professional is to challenge another professional. Right. I can prove their theory wrong and my theory is better. Right. So that kind of energy is very different than kind of the conformity that is expected in most religious communities at some level. If that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, but let me pause here for a minute. Let me ask you guys these questions. What was it like for you the week before? I mean, these are not really conversations that I've had with you. And I know it was a while ago, and maybe you don't want to talk about it, because I know, Margi, sometimes you're like, I don't want to give energy really to crappy parts of my life, but...
No, it's more I have a terrible memory around some certain times. And I actually think around painful events or where I have a lot of anxiety, oftentimes I don't remember. But I remember general themes. How would you answer that? What do you remember about the week before? You were doing some similar things, talking to newspapers, and
For me, it was super highly stressful because I didn't have like a PR team, you know, so I'm talking to all these newspapers and all these TV stations and putting out statements to respond to things that were being claimed here and there, apologists or the church. And I'm trying to write press releases and trying to help. People are asking about vigils, and I'm trying to share information here and there and talking to the media. And so just like a huge whirlwind, I felt overwhelmed and like I couldn't handle it all. And all the people messaging me and all the people giving advice and trying to balance all that, it just was overwhelming.
Yeah.
Emotionally. And
I can totally relate to all of that.
Yeah.
I remember thinking that, like, every time I ask Steve a question, he probably has a lawyer or somebody telling him how to respond to me.
A law firm. How about a law firm?
Law firm.
Yeah.
Yeah, they get to be represented by a legal team. I wasn't able to be. Yeah. And I actually took that very seriously, actually. I didn't want a lot of influence. I really wanted, I listened to a lot of people. You know, John, you gave me some thoughts, and Greg Prince was giving me thoughts. Joanna Brooks was giving me thoughts. Like a lot of really wonderful people came to offer some of their wisdom. At the end of the day, I wanted it to be
yours,
me. Like, this is my response. This is how I'm thinking through it. And I really grabbed onto this transparency model. Like, I'm just going to be me. I'm going to share what's going on. Yeah. I'm going to, unless somebody tells me it's confidential, there have been a few confidential conversations that I won't disclose because that was asked of me. But the letter didn't say anything about confidentiality. This was happening to me. So I tried to just take that approach. But I totally relate to that pressure and that saying things that maybe later you'd regret. And of course, you know, anytime with journalism, it's always funny to hear the story. You talk to a journalist, right? And then the story comes out and you're like, well, that's not exactly what I meant, right?
Oh,
or
every time, yeah.
That's not exactly, or they'll take the one sentence, but it can be kind of taken out of context because the other three sentences explain that sentence.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I can totally relate to all that, John. But
I remember for me that one thing that kind of was stressful and came to a head in that time was how split I felt. Because so John felt really strongly about shining a light on the process, which I felt for. But we had young kids still, and we lived in Logan. And so I felt really split, where I'm also a private person overall. So I could feel for what his intention was and felt like it was really important. And I felt it was important for the community too, not just for us. So you kind of have this sense of like a public responsibility almost, or an offering. But then I felt this tension too with our kids and what's best for our family and what it would mean. And sometimes in the moment, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know how it's going to affect. And we've since done an interview where I interviewed John about this, the things we didn't see, the effects of it that, you know, affected our kids till now. I mean, they're still. And so I remember feeling just this extreme tension, confusion, and stress because it all felt, I feel like, larger than us. And it was something.
Yeah. So many responsibilities. I felt that too. The responsibility for my clients, the responsibility for my public, responsibility for my family, responsibility for my self-care.
Yeah.
I mean, goodness. I mean,
that's right.
I've canceled 2 weeks of my clients. That's unheard of for me. And it's also unheard of that I've done it like anytime I have to cancel clients because I'm sick or because something came up, travel, like I always send them a note. I look at who I'm canceling. Is there somebody that maybe, you know, even though I'm struggling, I should probably make some energy for? Like, I haven't done any of that. So I'm just putting out there like a public apology to anybody who's my client right now that, there has not been a lot of care that I've been able to offer like I typically am able. I usually have the bandwidth to manage my own personal issues and my clinic, and that hasn't happened for 2 weeks. My staff is managing it, but so I'm guessing there's some mixed feelings there for my clients that I may have to repair or do some repair work with people that I've either felt ignored, or maybe I've messaged incorrectly, or there's a variety of things that there's probably some wounds there that I'm going to have to face next week, and I'm super willing to do it. But that makes me sad. Yeah, it makes me really sad. So I think all mental health professionals at some level, and we all are, because Margi, you do a lot of coaching and you're very mindful in your practice, and we carry responsibilities that are heavy. I see that in first responders, like through the COVID. I see that through doctors and nurses. I see that, my partner now, Joe, had a 25-year career in paramedicine. The stories he has, the ways he had to cope with managing his own personal life while watching super deep, like visceral trauma. It's one thing to see, sit with emotional trauma. It's another thing to watch somebody kind of die in front of your eyes and not be able to save them. I mean, there's so many of us that carry these kinds of wounds, and not just mental health professionals. So when we're going through our own personal shiz, it's tough. And parents, and we're parents, many of us, right? Yeah. How many ER doctors didn't see their families for weeks because they didn't want to contaminate their own kids? I mean, so much pain, right? Like, we're all going through a lot of pain. It's a lot.
Yeah.
Well, do you want to talk a little bit about just kind of our experiences getting to the place? Because I don't know if sometimes I forget what I've talked about in what conversations. So I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, but my expectation arriving to the place, and first of all, I was really very pleased that I arrived in calm. And do you know what I want to give credit to that? The Queen station on Pandora.
Oh, brilliant.
Because there were a lot of things that happened on that Sunday that was just, I don't know if you want to call it divine intervention or just serendipity, but first of all, I was wanting to write my thoughts a lot more for the presentation, that whatever I was going to have to do. My computer shuts down. Well, crap, John, can you go figure out my computer, please? And in the meantime, I'm going to listen to self-care, right? Self-care. I've got self-care. So I'm going to listen to meditative, like Reiki music, and just sit here in my bed. And I press a button thinking it was the Reiki station. I must have pressed 1 or 2 above. And all of a sudden, another one bites dust, another one. And I was like, well, that can work. This is an interesting message the universe is sending me right now. But what it did is it got me up and it got me moving. And I love to dance. Yeah. And I don't know, John, you were in the front room. I don't know what the reaction was, but I'm sure from the bedroom where I was at, all of a sudden you could hear me stomping. I was stomping my boots and I was singing out loud, and I was using my body, and that felt so good. Felt so good. Like all of this stress and tension that you don't even realize you're carrying, like I just got it out of my body. And then song after song, don't stop believing. That one came on. Like, I'm like, what the heck is happening with this station? It was like 10 or 11 songs before John was able to come back and go, by the way, your computer's broken. And every single song was like amazing. So I think that got a lot of my angst out and my stress. Yeah. So when I walked up to the building and drove there with Andy, I was really feeling calm. Like, whatever happens, happens. I wasn't feeling like anger or, I'm going to show them. I wasn't feeling, I was just like calm. I saw my witnesses. I walked up to them. Hi, how are y'all doing? That's when they started talking about this bathroom thing. So I kind of was like, wait, what's going on? And like, Like I was starting to
Wow,
ask
so
them
that was
about
really
that.
soon, huh?
Yeah.
That was pretty quick.
Well, because they were there before me.
Yeah.
And they had asked to use the bathroom because they, two of them, I think, needed to use the bathroom while they were waiting. So they had already had kind of a negative experience that I didn't realize they had had. So I started being like a little bit like, wait, what's going on? But then pretty quickly, John saw me and came over, and then the guy came out and was like, get off the property, and just his tone. And that's when I felt that like, that self-protective, like, oh, no, you don't. You don't treat my people like this. And sorry, John, it was definitely, I felt that towards you, but I felt it super bad for my women. I felt it super strong. I was like, well, John, he expects that probably, or he has to deal with that all the time. I don't like it that you have to experience that, but I feel like you and I are fairly resilient. I didn't feel like some of my witnesses were, I felt like some of my witnesses were having their first experience with unrighteous dominion that I've been having for 20 years.
Right.
So for me, it wasn't a new thing to experience unrighteous dominion. It wasn't a new thing to be ignored. It wasn't a new thing to be like, oh, Sister Helfer, just move along. That's a stupid idea, right? I mean, I've been dealing with that my whole professional career.
Right.
So that's when that intense, and I've talked about that's unfortunately, I learned that through my father's anger. I learned that response. And I don't mean to malign my father because he was also a very great father in many ways, but in some ways his temper management was not healthy for our family. So that's the feeling I immediately had. So then I was on the defensive going in. I was still calm. I wasn't like, like middle fingering everybody or anything. I was calm, but I was now firm and tense. And then, I was noticing the one by one and the silly requests. And then I was just like, and then while I was in there, the first time when they said, you have to turn off your phone, I was just normal voice, like, no, I can't do that. I'm not willing to do that. That's where I have my notes. That wasn't explained to me. That was kind of the tone I was using. By the second time, I had raised my voice because I wanted them to hear me. The three men that I was guessing was in that room. So I said, this wasn't part of the contract, so I had that kind of tone. And then as soon as he said no, I was just like, I'm out. Like, I don't have any energy for this. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to plead. I'm not going to ask. I'm not going to try to come up with, to me, this just signaled what the original letter signaled. We're really not interested in having a conversation with you. Yeah. That wasn't the point to begin with. We're willing to play the game a little bit and let you come in here and say a few things, and we'll nod our heads and basically tell you you're still wrong. And that was the plan all along, right? Yeah. So I wasn't interested in trying anymore at that point. But I guess I was expecting the chapel to be locked at first, for them to come and open the door and invite me and my witnesses into like a lobby area where we have the couches and you talked about the Relief Society room. And then I was expecting us to be called back one by one, and then we'd all leave. And I was also expecting not to get an answer that night.
Right.
Because I figured they would take time to deliberate. And I also think that's a PR thing. They don't want to give you an answer in front of your whole crowd, or, especially if it's a negative answer, that everybody's going to get even more riled up. So I wasn't expecting an answer that night, but that was my expectation. And instead we had it was the side door. It wasn't even like the main lobby door. So it was a door. It was one of those doors in the stake centers that just kind of goes into a little tiny hallway. Like there was probably, I would say 10 feet, 12 feet. Between the front door and like the Jesus Christ picture. Right. And so it was just a tiny little hallway, and you could tell that there was a room to the right where they were, whatever room that was, maybe a Relief Society room or a council room or something. And then there was a left, which I'm sure went on a hallway where all the classrooms are. That's my guess of. So it was a very small, and there was a table in the middle. So I only had like 4 feet of space to have this conversation in. I felt like I was like trying to enter a prison or something. Like, it was really weird.
Yeah.
I did not expect that at all. And then there were two men that felt like bouncers. That's kind of the feeling. And the Relief Society president that I had invited was behind them kind of. And I could just see, I could just tell she was uncomfortable. Her body language was uncomfortable, of course, we don't even know each other. I haven't been there. She hasn't been my Relief Society president ever. So what was your experience like? Did we already talk about this? See, I'm tired.
That's okay. Yeah. So what, how did it shake out? Like,
well,
I remember some point you come back out.
Yeah, so I came out and I didn't even have the energy to tell Andy or the ladies what had happened. So I just walked away. I saw you kind of like, the crowd was like, oh, Natasha. I was like, I can't, I asked you to not follow me with the recording. I asked for Clint and Jenny because I just needed time to kind of just calm down. And because I figured what would happen next is that they would then invite the witnesses in to the same process, right? Like they would call in Andy and they would say, turn off your phone, right? And sign the document. I thought that all of them were going to go through that process and that I would just have to wait the half an hour or whatever that the witnesses would take. And I didn't really want to engage with the crowd while I was waiting to see who would be able to go in or not. But instead, they just came out. Well, I guess Jody has talked about it. She wrote a thing on Exponent magazine, so you can go read her article there. But she said the Relief Society president came out first. And they're like, what's going on? And the Relief Society president was like, well, they told me to go home. And the ladies were like, well, wait a minute. We want you to be there with us when we go in. So everybody was still expecting, whether I went in or not, I still had the right for witnesses to go in. Like, what if I hadn't been able to show up?
Right.
I still had the right to have public witnesses go in. And then, so she went, I think she faltered, and then the guy came out. Like, she was kind of like, well, do I stay? Do I not? The Relief Society president. And then the same guy who just was acting very much like the word that they don't like me using, he came out and just basically said, you're all dismissed. It's over. And then, Jody and Jana pleading like, wait a minute, but we prepared. We flew here. Some of them were crying. Andy, like with these 5 women he barely knows, right? But feels kind of maybe that masculine protective, like energy for like, how do I help these women? And he himself, being rejected by people that he has served with and who he's worked with.
Yeah.
To me, I was not expecting it to go that bad, but I was not expecting it to go well.
Right.
I was expecting it to go cordially. Cordially. Where we could all be cordial, we could disagree, we could agree to disagree, and I'd probably get the X anyway. That's what I was expecting. But I was not expecting cruelty, and I was not expecting my witnesses to not be able to even be asked the same question I was.
Right.
Because some of them did have their papers ready. Some of them, I think, would have said, yeah, sure, I don't need to bring in my phone. So that got me, the bit of anger and angst that I felt that night was due to how my witnesses were treated and how my, ex-husband Andy was treated. It was just, it was cruel. It was cruel.
Yeah.
They didn't honor their time. They didn't honor their sacrifice. They didn't honor their finances. They didn't honor their families who they had traveled and been away from.
Yeah.
They didn't honor their callings and the fact that these women are active, and they didn't honor even the chapel building, because the chapel building belongs to the people. We pay for that with our tithings.
Yeah.
It's not the temple where we all understand, you have to follow certain things to go in. No, this is a homeless person can walk in on Sunday and join our congregation, and I hope they do, right? We don't leave. What's the sign outside? All visitors welcome.
Right.
So they didn't even honor our building.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was pissed.
I bet.
I was pissed. And rightfully so. And this is just kind of a loving thing. If y'all Mormons don't know how to feel, I get it, because y'all come from like waspy type cultures, but I feel, and I feel strongly.
Yeah.
And sometimes that maybe can come across as like unhinged or a little wonky doodle. And I think some people were worried about that. Like, is she losing it? And I'm like, no, I'm just doing my Latina thing. Because I'm like pissed off. Like, I saw my mother be pissed off at us when we were kids. And she wasn't scary, but she was loud, and she talked for like 3 hours when she was pissed with us.
Yeah.
You know? So it's like a normal day. That's what Jennifer Gonzalez said to me this morning. She's like, oh, that's a typical Tuesday for any of our mamitas. And I was like, okay, good. I wasn't crazy.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I get it. I get that. Andy calls it my rage eyes. I get those, and I get intense. So I get that. I know that that's how I present. And I've worked really hard on that, to not do that in sessions or to not do that in professional spaces. And even not to always do it in my home, because sometimes that energy is scary or too much. And so I get that about myself.
I think one thing that's important to kind of note in scenarios like that, and that's why when I was talking about it initially in our, like before your counsel, I was talking about it being a power, like a definite abuse of power, is that when, this is my opinion, but when you've had experiences with abuse of power before, and then you're in a situation like that, you're feeling all of the prior abuses. It is a layered experience. You're not just having one experience with those. You're having this very visceral experience of all those other times.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to acknowledge as women, that in that moment, you likely were having a cumulative experience.
Totally agree with that, Margie. Sierra was so wise. You are. I want to thank you publicly for tremendous amounts of wisdom you've offered me. Tremendous.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. As a friend and as a coach, you have offered me pearls of wisdom this last 2 years that have been so difficult for me. You have ministered to me.
You've done the same for us.
Yeah. All right. So since I'm crying, John, I would love to hear. I haven't had a chance to talk to you since I came back. What the heck happened? What was your experience? How were the people that you talked to? What was it like to be in my home on Sunday where it was like a little wonky doodle? Like, I'd love to hear your story.
And I'm curious if there was anything that surprised you. Because you've gone to quite a few excommunications, so I feel like you've got quite a comparison you could do. But were you surprised?
If there's an excommunication, John is there.
Seriously. You're like the traveling. I got it.
Well, and you get to see all parts of the country. Like, would you ever have gone to Wichita, Kansas?
Houston, St. George, Ohio. Like, where do the Youngs live? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, Ohio.
Yeah, somewhere in Ohio.
Somewhere in Ohio.
Some town in Ohio. Yeah, it's glamorous. It's very good. Okay, so let's see. I was surprised at how many people were in your house the day of. You had, I don't know, 10, 15 people there. There was a full buffet spread, and it was all the Relief Society had showed up and were doing their thing.
That was Carlene Williams who brought all the food. She's amazing.
Ton of food.
I didn't know
Lots
that.
of food. It was really nice.
Members of her family let us borrow a car.
I think that it's totally true that you wanted this to be, you were not looking for like strategy or planning. You wanted this to be yours. So there were ways that was communicated to me just right And that's good.
Which is healthy.
It was like, this is Natasha's thing.
Like that, I totally shut you down. Was I totally rude to you, John?
It's good.
No, that's healthy.
I mean...
And it wasn't just you. It was Clint.
Oh, yeah.
It was Andy. It was like all these men that were
dudes,
trying to help. And I was like, everybody zip it. Especially if you're a man. Just zip it.
And honestly,
sit back.
I wanted that. I was just there to help. If I could help. So yes, I came, ready to help in all sorts of ways. But I also was just trying to be quiet and
honor Natasha's experience.
And just listen and see how I could show up.
And you all did. I will say all of the men did do that.
Yeah.
That's good.
So thank you.
Yeah, this wasn't a place to assert patriarchal privilege.
Yeah. Can you imagine?
It was not a patriarchal zone.
That was not going to work.
So you were in a zone. I've worked with you for 10 plus years. I've never seen you in that state before, ever.
And I'm perfectly comfortable you talking about what it was like.
I can attest to his zone.
Yeah.
He was in his zone as well.
You mean when he was going through this?
Prior to, I'm just saying for the experience.
Yeah. I would love to know what you observed because I don't even know how I was different.
I mean, you were kind of giving sermons, like you were pacing. Everyone was kind of looking around. You were giving sermons to all of us, kind of lecturing, kind of
processing,
crying.
Yeah, that's
emoting.
Processing.
Yeah.
And for the first couple hours, it was,
Oh, gosh.
But by the third or fourth hour, some of us were like, is she okay?
Is she okay?
Is she going to be okay?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there was a part of me there. Some of us were like, is she okay? Honestly.
And that's okay to talk about.
Yeah. Like we were kind of thinking, is there some mania going on? Not in a way to stigmatize anyone or to pathologize you, but it was just like, is she okay? It was like, has she had enough sleep? Is she at her wit's end? Is she running on fumes? Is she totally safe? We were, all those things were going. And I thought, I wouldn't say Bill and Sam acted that way, but none of us had been women in the church, and none of us, I'll just say this, there was a very strong, you wanted female support, and there was a very strong sense that this was not the time for the men, which was totally appropriate. But in all I've seen with Kate and what I saw with Kate and with some other things, like there's a strong female reaction to being abused by the patriarchy and having lived under the thumb of the patriarchy for 40, 50 years that I think elicits some emotion and some reactions that men just would never be able to quite understand. Were you feeling some of that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And I was even shutting down some of my women. Like, looking back, I think I owe Jana Spangler an apology. I owe Jody England an apology just because in their trying to help, I would often interrupt or shut down their ideas very quickly, and so I'm going to have all of those conversations. And I do, and this is what I was talking with Jennifer about today in specific, because I wanted to ask her as, Latina sister per se, like, because I'm always very willing to do self-awareness work. I'm to the point that I really welcome it. I welcome like people saying, you're not doing that right. Or, whereas earlier on in my career, that would really make me very insecure, or I'd have a defensive approach, or defensive posture. But so I wanted to ask, like, what do you think? Do you think I was manic or kind of ill, or, and she had some really great framings, and I'll talk more about that in my podcast with her. But, she reminded me, manic energy isn't always unhealthy. Some of the best things that have come out of humanity come from manic energy. And that's true. Like Van Gogh's work, a lot of times, a lot of literature, a lot of poetry, a lot of flow comes from these spaces where you're just like kind of facing something, very difficult. And even as a mental health clinician, we talk about, like, for example, postpartum psychosis, something that a person would never have in their normal life, but because of the stress of a birth or whatever, you can have mental health symptoms that aren't typical to your regular experience, right? So I do agree that I had some manic energy. I also don't know that I regret anything I said or anything that, even that I wrote, because a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, you're like posting like every 5 minutes, because I had a lot of ideas and I had a lot of energy, but I go back and I'm like, really, I've only changed a few spelling errors. So I'm okay with, I'm sorry you all had to put up with me for 6 hours. So there's this interesting interplay between not being well, but still being very well, that I'm still trying to understand myself.
And well, given that the situation was completely inhumane and unnatural.
Yeah.
So the response, I think that's what's really difficult is to try and talk about, I was talking about this with Leah, like when you try to relate it to someone who hasn't gone through it, I think it's really difficult to do.
Yeah. And that's true of anything, right? Like a death of a child or being a widow or going through a faith transition. Like, why do all of our believing family members not understand the people who are leaving? Well, because until you go through it yourself, you can be sympathetic, you can have compassion, but you don't really get it.
Yeah, and so that observation can be something that's really disorienting, maybe for people who are not in the position to do that. But I just thought it was interesting, the shutting people down, because that to me speaks of overwhelm.
Yeah.
That's just like I have too much. Yeah. Nope, not you. Nope, not you. Yeah. Which I think is completely understandable given the situation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So tell me more about you and your experience.
Well, there was let's just say there were some rituals that you guys held that aren't mine to share that were very emotional, very powerful. And I don't know if you want to talk about that, but I mean, those are kind of the closing things that happened right before we left. And I just, I don't feel like I have any right to talk about that.
Yeah, and I think if I ever talk about those things, I'll talk to Jana and Jody and some of the women that were there first, and we may decide how to podcast about that together if we do. We took a very meditative, spiritual, prayerful approach to preparing ourselves for this moment.
And there were these moments where you held the letters and you held the letters that had been sent to you and that were bound, and also the letter that was written by the mental health professionals. And I mean, just quite frankly, you were sobbing over those letters.
Yeah.
Were you carrying all those stories? Were you feeling the weight
they
of
were
all
there.
that?
They were in my hands, and that was that awe. That was that like gratitude and awe. And also just the vicarious trauma too. We're like here's so many letters that represent everything I've been about professionally. It was validating, sadly validating. Like I was right. You're causing harm.
Yep.
But and the vulnerability. I mean, I was just like honored. Like, who am I to have deserved any type of these books? I was just overwhelmed with awe and gratitude and also pain, like just that, like so many people are hurting. And this only represents, what we know, right? Like when one letter gets written to Congress, it represents probably like 200 people, right? One person wrote what 200 people are thinking, something. There's a statistic that I'm probably not getting right. But yeah. So yes, what was that like for you to witness all these women that were acting very differently than maybe you normally experience, John.
I mean, I'll just say that you and I have worked, I would say, in a very clinical settings for the past 10 years.
Yes.
And there's always been sort of like, well, John's maybe less of a believer, and Natasha is more of a believer than John. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And I've never really known what that meant, because we haven't really drilled into that in our personal interactions for me to really know. And one thing that was very clear to me is that you really do still have a very sincere and meaningful spiritual side and belief side to you that's very different from me. And that came out in a way I'd never seen before. I'd never seen you pray. I'd never seen you pray sincerely. And so that was something, I can't say it was like out of the realm of what I considered possible, but I saw a spiritual side to you that was kind of the first time I'd ever seen that.
Yeah. And I purposefully don't publicize that, because I don't ever want, and even when we say pray, a lot of people might assume that means a certain thing, but for me, it may mean something. It may not mean literal. It can mean a lot of different things to me. So, and I've never wanted my spirituality to get in the way of the work that we are doing, which are people's faith journeys. And I want to be able to be there with the person who's like, F the church, I'm out, and I'm atheist, and we're going to be dirt food, worm food after we die. I'm like, you go. Like, I'm there with you. I can totally understand that. And I can. And I can be with the person who's like, I'm going to, put my name on the prayer roll at the temple. And because I think my sibling really needs help right now. And I'm like, yeah, I get that. And I hope too, that as I shared my family's witnesses, what was so touching to me about my family's witnesses.
Oh, right. Yeah. Your brother.
Like, you can see the spectrum there.
I loved that.
Right? I've got believing siblings. I've got non-believing siblings. I've got in-between siblings. I've got a mother who's like raging about polygamy. So
that was powerful.
I get it.
That was powerful. And I felt like it was such powerful modeling too, of coming together, rallying, even though that's great differentiation, but what matters in the moment.
Each one of us have a very different relationship with Mormonism in my family. And I loved that.
Do you know what? I just had a realization, and my back is tingling in that Holy Ghost kind of way.
Oh, I love it, John.
Look at you and your spiritual
But it's also kind of a sad, dark thought. I felt excluded. I'll just say from the circle. I'm saying that metaphorically.
Ooh.
I felt excluded from the circle, and it is not until right now that I realized that that's what women feel all the time.
That's beautiful. I'm glad you did that work.
Well, I can't believe it took me that long to make that connection.
Well, look at you berate yourself. Look at that harshness that you also display.
And excluded by that Sunday ritual, or excluded kind of just in general, like
both,
everything?
I mean, yeah, but I'm not whining. It's not me like saying poor me.
Yeah. No, I think those are the really good.
I was happy to have it be your experience.
Yeah. No, I think that's great. That is great. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good, John.
Yeah.
That's good
You
work.
do you, baby.
That's good work.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but I'm not saying poor me. I'm just saying.
No, I get it. Yeah. And I want you to feel safe talking about this kind of stuff, because I know it's tender stuff in our community. This whole patriarchy, women. That's a very tender space. We're going to do a whole series on that. I was going to do a whole series on that last month, but that's been postponed for maybe 2 to 3 months from now. Anyway. Yeah. Well, so then tell me what it was like to interact and go to the place. And
maybe the most shocking thing was to see 3 police cars in the parking lot. Like that was,
So that hasn't happened before.
Not 3. Like maybe 1. I don't know.
3 does feel.
I don't remember 3 police cars. And that was like, whoa, like, really? Like, what do they think? They think there's going to be a riot? Like, do they think we're going to storm the building? Do they, like, that was weird.
That is weird.
Especially because there's no, like, all the excommunications you've been at have been fairly peaceful. There have been a lot more people. Like, a lot more people showed up, I believe, at
There's
Bill
no
Reel
precedent
and
necessarily.
Sam Young, and everybody was always respectful. I was at Sam Young's, and everybody was just mingling in the lawn.
Although I'll say your crowd, I think, was probably bigger than Leah and Cody's. And I was pleasantly surprised with the size of the turnout for you. I don't know, 40-ish people.
Especially when about 95% of them came from out of town.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. Who lives in freaking Derby?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, like I think it was like...
We love you people from Derby
and Wichita.
and Wichita.
I think I could have counted like maybe 10 people that were from, you know, like either my staff or there was one person from the Wichita Stake. There was like 2 or 3 people from my old ward. There was my professor who came from Friends University. But everybody else had driven or flown. Yeah. And some people had driven. There was a young man that drove from Cedar City and just went overnight and everything. Like, and I'm glad to say that your donations have reimbursed him for his travel costs.
Good.
At least. So
good.
And I'm going to try to, that's a whole nother project I have is to try to reimburse people a little bit if they needed it.
So I was grateful for the support. There was a lot of support there, and the cop cars were annoying, and I was just surprised at how fast, because it was almost like I was setting up and starting to interview people, and then all of a sudden you're leaving, and I'm like, what? Why is she leaving? And I swear I thought I bet it's because of her phone. Like I knew that, or at least I suspected it. Mm-hmm. And but I didn't know for a while. So you were over there talking to Clint and Jenny, and I'm like, what the freak is going on?
Yeah.
Did you think that they were going to still have the witnesses go in one by one, though?
No, because as I watched our witnesses testify at our disciplinary council, and even as I talked.
Yes, that's so true.
They were just like literally like picking their teeth, looking at their watch.
Didn't look at us at all.
They were not paying attention.
Yeah.
These disciplinary councils are a kangaroo court. They're a joke. The decisions are predetermined. They're vetted by the area and general authorities. It's even in the handbook that you can't excommunicate without area authority approval. So that guarantees that this comes from above.
Right. Which also means this appeal letter that I put together. I mean, that's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah. So it did not surprise me at all that if you don't go in, they're certainly not going to waste any time with the witnesses.
Who went first? Did you all go first, or did they go first?
So for me, it was we were invited in. He read from a script, kind of like literally read from a script of the proceedings. He read the charges. He asked me, "How do you plead?" I said, "Not guilty."
Interesting language, right?
Right.
Like a court of law weirdness type stuff.
Yeah. And then he brought in the witnesses, is how I remember it.
Oh, so your witnesses went first.
That's how I remember it. How do you remember it?
I remembered you going first, but it doesn't really matter.
That's funny. Yeah. I remembered it being the witnesses going first, and then I spoke, and then they dismissed us. Mm-hmm. And then they didn't want to give us the because there was media there was press, there was a huge vigil, a candlelight vigil, and they didn't want this media moment where live streamed across the world. I came out reading the verdict. So for the first time ever that I'm aware of, there was no verdict that night.
So typically people do get the verdict that night.
I think before me, because I mean, what are they going to do? They decide there. They vote and they decide there. I think that's how all disciplinary councils are. I think. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. But starting with this, they do this little delay thing, and I don't know if they vet it with Kurt McConkie or they just wait 3 days and do. exit polling. Like, I don't know what they do, but they certainly wait 3-ish days before they let you.
And were you able to, did you want to, and did you stay together as a couple? In other words, were you there with him, or they didn't allow you to be with him, or?
Yeah. Margie was with me the whole time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they didn't make like you can only come in one at a time for that.
No,
I had wondered about that. I actually wanted to face them alone, from a matriarchy position. I didn't want, even though I would have loved for Andy to be there with me and witness it with me, just to have a witness. I had purposefully thought I'm not going to ask for that because I want to give the message that I can stand on my own 2 feet. Like I don't need a man protecting me, like
That's so important.
So, and I even struggled with the Relief Society president being there because I wanted to just show up me. Like I don't need female support. I don't need my husband. I'm perfectly capable of facing the three of you on my own any day. Anytime.
Yeah.
Bring it, right? But I also wanted to honor the fact that we have made some changes and we're including women. And I wanted another woman to witness what was going on so that she could be kind of like, so this is how maybe some of my sisters are being treated. Or if I have a sister who in my ward who's going through this issue, I wanted her to have maybe kind of that lived experience herself. And I wanted to honor the changes that the church is making to be a little bit more inclusive, even though there's still no power for women. So that was kind of I went back and forth on asking the Relief Society president to be there. Plus, I kind of felt bad just for inconveniencing her, quite frankly. At the same time, I want to let people know, like, if you're willing to say yes to these callings, you kind of got to be ready for
That's right.
the crappy parts of the callings. You can say no to these callings.
Yeah.
That's right.
I was kind of outraged that you asked for the full Stake High Council to be there, and that was within your written rights, and they denied that.
Yeah.
That seemed outrageous to me. Why have that? Why have that as an option for you, and then when you invoke it,
Deny.
they deny
And no
it?
explanation as to why. So I thought they actually would want that too, because then it's like more witnesses for them, too. But I didn't really understand why.
I mean, my guess is they don't want to infect the top leadership in the stake with questions around apostasy and faith crisis stuff and stuff
And my
around
scientific
sexuality.
data.
No, I mean, yeah.
Right. No, I'm kind of with you.
Science is a little dangerous.
Like letting all
sometimes
those
to
men
think.
know that I think that it's okay that they're masturbating. Yeah, they probably didn't want that. I swear.
I can see Natasha. I know what you guys are doing. All you 15, I know what you're doing. You can't fool me.
And I'm actually really sad that you were shamed about it. Anybody want to talk to me about it?
And by the way, the shame oftentimes just makes you do it more.
How many of you were really having a rotten 12, 13-year-old experience? Let me know. Here's my number. Here's my cards.
So true.
Oh, man.
So yeah, I guess I was surprised and shocked how soon it was over, and then we had to figure out where to go. And the police, like, it was almost like Starsky and Hutch. They like drive their cars up and like park it there, and they're like ushering us all out as soon as possible. Like we can't even stay on the property that we all paid for, frankly, and have a peaceful vigil.
Yeah, under their gazebo that they have for that purpose.
Yeah.
With the cookies people brought. But
It's almost like they pull out the bullhorn. Which is like, really?
I didn't realize all that was happening really. Because
I'm not saying there was a bullhorn.
I just got in the car with Andy and we took off, So I didn't realize that there was that. I knew the police were there, but I didn't realize it was so aggressive.
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't like handcuffing us, but I mean,
they were definitely.
It was a show of force.
Yeah,
get out of here now. Leave the premises. So, yeah, and it was kind of shocking because normally, one of my favorite parts is meeting people. All these people come from all over, and it's a way to get to know people and talk to people and share with people and have a moment.
Right.
And all of that was dashed, and we had to just get off the property. And I mean, of course, they don't want us to be doing that. So, of course, they're not going to be hospitable and warm and encouraging. So I guess I didn't expect that, but it was disappointing.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I kind of took over down at the Keeper of the Plains with the rest of my preaching energy. So it's not like people really got a chance to talk much to each other then either.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess I did the best I could. I hope people got value out of coming.
Yeah.
Well, can I say one thing?
Yeah.
The live stream feed of the post event is the largest live stream I've ever had on Mormon Stories podcast ever. Like, I don't know, 2,400 people.
You mean when we were down by the river?
Yeah. Well,
Wow.
The whole thing, the whole like vigil, the thing by the river, but also the speech you gave after and the witnesses, all that. 2,400 people were watching all at once. Like, it was a major. Sam Young's event was not. I don't remember it being that heavily attended. Nothing came close. So, combination of love for you, people supportive of the event, the times, all the people that have left between a couple of years ago and now. I don't know all the ways to account for that massive number, but like, and it was that way. You know, it was 3 hours where I think we were in the cold for like 3 hours.
I am so sorry.
No, it's fine. And but even like with only an hour left, there were still a couple thousand people. Like it was. I was like, when are these people going to drop off? And they just weren't. They weren't dropping off. And it was just a major. It was a major media event, and people were tuned in from everywhere.
Wow.
You know? So you had a massive show of support, and I just have to say that like. I was talking to a family member about this, and I'm just like, how in the world does the church think that this has helped them in any way?
Yeah.
Like, from all the people that were members of record but hadn't resigned to them being pushed over to resign because of this, to all the people that were active and faithful that because of this event, that was like the straw that broke the camel's back where they now are going to stop attending, you know, to all the people who are faithful and Orthodox who now are like questioning because of this action they took against you, you know, and then all the ripple effects, because when any one person resigns, there's going to be 5 people that are all of a sudden like awake to the problems or the issues. And for every 5 people that go inactive, for every person that goes inactive, there are going to be 5 people who are now like, whoa, why'd they go inactive? There's like this reverse pyramid scheme dynamic where there's this massive ripple effect where it's not just the people that are immediately affected, it's their whole network of spouses and children and parents and ward members and friends, where everyone's sharing this on social media and they're all talking about it. And then all the people that loved you and that were affected by you, and the believing spouses of the mixed faith marriages that were angry because you helped save their marriage and now they're kicking you out. And then all the therapists that now are angry and sad. Like, who is running this organization to, you know, who is thinking that in any way it's a good idea to, number one, have disciplinary councils, number 2, to pick on you, and then all the massive network of the people that are going to be affected. I literally don't understand how they're thinking. They're smart. They've got more money than Heavenly Father at this point. They've got the best consultants.
Margi's thinking about that.
They've got so much money, so many smart people. I don't know what they're thinking. Like, Mark Nagel certainly has had a major surge in resignations as a result of the past few weeks. And I just don't know how in the world, who's benefited? I don't think you benefited. I don't think I benefited. I don't think any of our listeners benefited.
The community, yeah.
I think the community was traumatized. I think the church lost a crap ton of members and credibility. This is in the Washington Post and, you know, national news all over Utah. Who wins? Who won? You know?
This is John's Latin side coming out, by the way.
know,
Does he
right?
have a hidden Latin side? He went to Guatemala, right?
I'm
his mission.
sorry.
No, I love it. I love your... I know that some people are bugged by that, like, flow that you have sometimes, but I'm like, preach, brother, preach. No, and I think too that It's interesting because it's not necessary. Like if they're really worried about me being an influence, quite frankly, I was the worst influence on my own influence because I was writing things that if any believing Mormon wants to Google me, they're already going to see that I don't agree always. And I've noticed that in my practice. Like my practice used to be 100% almost believing members of the church. And that has dwindled dramatically over the last 10 years. Like maybe now, I would say most of the believers that come to see me are because they're in mixed faith marriages, are because they're family members, and every now and then because they really are dealing with a very serious issue, like realizing that they have, like a transgender child and they have no clue how to handle that, right? Or a gay child, or they have a suicidal kid, who just mutilated their genitals because they're masturbating. I mean, believers are willing to go out of the box when they're desperate.
Yep, that's right.
Right. So I was already discrediting myself because by them continually putting forth this narrative that is, in my view, sexually unhealthy, they're saying this is how you should think about sex. They didn't need to excommunicate me to already have that tension be very much alive and well, just naturally.
Yeah.
I discredited myself by being honest about my positions. So I agree with you. I think the net gain for them, maybe they're worried. Yeah, they don't want to give me credibility. They don't want people to listen to me. But every time they mention pornography in general conference, they're automatically creating that tension between me and them that people have to wrestle with in their own lived experiences and homes. So yes, I think that it was greatly unnecessary, harmed me personally, harmed my family, harmed our community, kind of embarrassed us, I think. I think this is embarrassing, quite frankly. I mean, transgender issues are kind of an issue right now in the national news. Like a lot of people are struggling with transgender rights, but masturbation, like that fight was over 50 years ago in Christianity. Who's talking about masturbation other than very, very fundamental religions? So I think it's embarrassing, quite frankly. I'm embarrassed for my church.
Yep.
Even the reactions I'm getting from some of the journalists that interview, they're like, wait, what did they say? Journalists are usually pretty neutral. Neutral. And so then what happened? But sometimes I'm getting like that really happened? That's what they really think? Or, journalists are reacting that way.
Yeah. Yep.
So.
Yeah. And then you see like Jana Reese, writing an article for her national, readers that she thinks excommunication is medieval and barbaric and counterproductive.
She's another gem. She's a gem.
She's a faithful believing member. So, I mean, it's almost like people are in open revolt. So anyway, it's just bizarre, and I'm not trying to bash the church. It's just like, my wish is that there would just be no more disciplinary councils. That's what I want. That's all I've ever wanted is just stop it. The Catholic Church, people wrote in. It's like, you can say, hey, I disagree with the Pope about contraception, or hey, I think women should have the priesthood as a Catholic. You don't get booted. You just don't. Yeah. And what modern church is excommunicating people for like TikToks or podcasts, or in your case, just sharing ethical, evidence-based mental health best practices? Like, who does that? Yeah, and
it's not a healthy procedure, right? Like, it's kind of I kind of do the metaphor of, back in the 90s or 80s. It was when I was going to school, so it must have been the 80s. The Moms Against Drunk Driving campaign, which very well intentioned, obviously. Like, who wants us dealing with drunk driving issues, right? Nobody does. But their approach was very shaming. They would have the cars that were crunched up, and they'd bring it to our high schools, and they tell you this big sad story about the person who died. So I see some of this too with texting and driving, very dramatic stories. And what the research shows is that fear is a short-term motivator, but it is not a long-term solution. And then, of course, I've brought up Brene Brown a lot because all of her research around shame not being really a place where people can heal and actually change behavior that maybe isn't what's best for them or their family or their marriage, right? Which is a lot of how I talk about pornography, for example. A lot of people think I'm just pro-porn and everybody go look at porn. And I don't have like a clinical stance on porn. Like that's up to people's values. I have my own personal stances on porn, but that's nobody's business. But clinically, it's my job to not judge whether a person thinks looking at porn is part of their value system or not. But if it's not part of your value system and you're struggling with feeling like it's a compulsive behavior in your life, well, I've got some ideas about how we could actually reduce that tension and even some of your behavior without using these shaming approaches that have been proved completely ineffective. So I have a pretty similar goal with the church on that. You know, if Mormons don't want to be looking at porn because it doesn't make them feel good and it bothers their spouse or it goes against their own inner conflict of their values, I can help you with that.
That's
but
right.
Not in the ways
it's about what's effective,
done
right?
We have a question from a listener, my dear friend Gerardo. He asks if you had any reaction.
Hi, Gerardo.
He asked if you had any reaction to the Deseret News' coverage of your excommunication.
I laughed.
Why? Well, I don't even know what.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how many articles are out there. But the original article was, I even showed it to Joe, who's a no-mo. He's my boyfriend now. It was just laughable. They only quoted the church. They only quoted the Deseret News, I feel bad because, I feel like they have some really good journalists, but they're kind of in the same professional dilemma that I'm in.
Well,
they're working for an entity that they really can't do good journalism.
Right.
Well, it's always Tad Welch that does these types of articles. He's been doing them for 6, 7, 8 years. Tad, and this isn't to attack Tad. I've actually met him once. I met him at McKenna Denson's press conference, of all places, and he said hi to me. But he's kind of the go-to guy to write the articles on sensitive topics. And it's just
there was no quote from me. There was no quote from like any professional, like even Kristen Hodson or Julie DeAzevedo, like, the LDS people. It was a lot of emphasis on what was in the written letters and what I was being accused of. And it was just like totally PR for the church. And I'm like, wow, we all know that Deseret News has that conflict of interest. You can't have a journalistic paper have credibility when a church owns it. That's just kind of ridiculous. It's the same issue with LDS Family Services. Yeah. It's the same. I know really good clinicians who work for LDS Family Services who are kind of like really wrestling because they're not allowed to practice the way they want to practice. And then I know a lot of clinicians who actually are very comfortable in those unethical spaces and need to really kind of take a good look at their ethics.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So anyway, I don't know what other observations I have other than that I was freezing and exhausted by midnight.
Well, and Kyle Ashworth from Latter Gay Stories, he was in a T-shirt. Yeah. I didn't even notice him.
I was in a hoodie.
Oh my gosh, until like 2.5 hours in, and then finally one of the ladies in the brought him a jacket. Yeah. Oh, I was like, those were the moments where I was like, yes, I'm having all this energy and flow, but am I expecting too much from the people who were witnessing it?
But you wanted your moment.
I told everybody do so much, Natasha.
I know, and I told everybody, you can leave. I don't care if I'm talking to nobody, but I'm going to talk. Yeah. But anyway, that's the one. I wish I would have had more capacity to manage that piece.
Try to be easy.
Yeah.
On yourself, maybe with that.
I will, Margie.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm not as harsh. I'm able to be like, yeah, I totally messed up. And so what's next? As long as I say I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm not super hard on myself by now. I was super hard on myself as a 21-year-old. So I've done a lot of work on that.
Do you have any kind of reflections, just final reflections on or things you want to share?
Yeah, I don't know.
Can I ask one quick thing?
Oh, yeah.
Sure. I think the couple days the couple days after were really hard on you. And I think that whatever we discussed about your state leading up to it, I don't think it ended that night. I think you continued to struggle.
Yes, and I'm still struggling. I'm still struggling. Like,
you want to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah,
I don't mean to say.
No, I think that's
I can be very honest.
That actually was kind of my question, but it
what
was
you
a
meant.
little bit more vague so that she could choose to
You're so
disclose
nice,
or
Mark. I
not.
totally missed your vagueness.
Okay.
That's a good
John
time to
knows
have
you.
John's direct. I was like, do I have any last minute thoughts? Not really. No.
About the overall process.
No, so I came home. It was late. We had a late flight, so I didn't really get home till I got home on Monday. Well, first of all, Monday, so the day after, I just slept in. But I also was still posting a lot. I was trying to make room for my kiddo before I left. I had a friend with me that traveled with me and was not really able to think much. I mean, I was still very overwrought. Having discussions with Andy even, that, how are we processing this? So it was just hard. It was a hard day. I was tired. We traveled late at night.
But you stayed up super late the morning after the disciplinary council, and you were
probably.
posting.
Yeah,
you were.
Yeah.
I think you only got a couple hours sleep.
Yeah, I couldn't. I mean, I probably fell asleep at 4 a.m. and maybe got up at like 8 or 9.
Yeah.
So I mean, sleeping in means. I don't know. I can't track, but yeah, I still couldn't really fall asleep. And I have problems with insomnia anyway. Anyway, that's been a lifelong problem. So I got home and, and Clint and Jenny and Joe were waiting for me, picked us up, my friend and I, Carrie, and yeah, they basically, and I was probably where I felt that most unhealthy was in that car ride home. Mainly because I was like trying to explain and my voice was raised in this car where everybody could hear me quite well without me raising my voice. And so, yeah, I'm sure they were all like, even Joe was looking at me like, like,
Well,
like, okay, lady.
All I can say is by the time you're in the air, many people around you were really worried about you.
Yeah, and even my Symmetry Solutions team kind of like unpublished my page, which we haven't even had a chance to talk about yet. We meet on Fridays, so I'm looking forward to, I think they're worried that maybe I was offended that they did that. And I do have kind of mixed feelings about it, but not like offended feelings, like, I'm glad that at Symmetry we feel like we can take care of each other, and even though I'm kind of like the boss, I'm glad that they feel like the confidence to either call me out or put a boundary. So I have a lot of wonderful things to talk about with them. But we haven't even had a chance to do that. And I even want them to vent, if they need to, like vent their own stuff at me if they need to. So, but that's a totally different thing.
What was so hard about that? If you just had to summarize, what was so hard about the whole experience that was leaving you in that state towards the end? How would you describe
what was hard about what part?
The whole experience. It seemed like it kind of traumatized you.
Well, sure it did. I mean, there was a lot of things that were hard. First of all, I was having like 500,000 ideas, which is part of kind of like manic energy. And a lot of them I think are really good ideas. So I was like trying to, because I didn't want to forget them. I didn't want to forget all these ideas that I felt were coming, not realizing that I'd probably have those ideas there anyway. Like I didn't have to write them all down. It was Clint who like said, those ideas will probably be there. I'm like, that was a good reminder to breathe, yeah, if they're good enough ideas, they'll probably be there tomorrow or next week. But I was definitely feeling that frenzied, like, there was also some boundaries I wanted. I wanted, for example, like the post that I did where I said I vote opposed to President Nelson and to Steve Daley. I wanted that done kind of in a ritualistic way before I landed in Utah. Before I've set foot on Utah, like ritual and symbolism has a lot of meaning for me. That's something that works for me. So I did not want to set foot on Utah soil without having voted opposed to this unrighteous dominion, not only of my excommunication, but really of how my witnesses were treated. Like I really had more anger about that than my own treatment. Because I think, like what I said, I'm kind of used to it. I don't think I would have had the same reaction if my witnesses had been treated correctly. So those were things that were hard. And then, when I found out, nobody was able to communicate with me because I was traveling, my phone was on whatever airplane mode. So they shut down my page, or they paused it, whatever. They didn't shut it down. They unpublished it, and then you can publish it. It wasn't like they were threatening anything that I had written. But my immediate reaction when I found out was the church did it. I didn't know. Nobody had been able to communicate with me because of my travel. And so that heightened me even more. And that's how I got into the car with Clint and Jenny and Joe. I think I still didn't know. Yeah, I didn't know at that point. So I was fuming that, they're talking about religious freedom, and then they can't even tolerate my page, and somebody figured out how to report my page. And so I was raging about that all the way home, and it wasn't even the case, right? So there's a lesson learned on assumptions, right? Like, don't assume always that you have your story right. So that was kind of like that was like the nail that hit the head, that here in this loving attempt to kind of help me rest and pause and really think about what I was writing, which is, I'm guessing, the intention of my symmetry team, which I had a quick conversation with one of my providers about it the next day, and I understood what they were saying. But in that moment, it was like the final fury towards the church. So I'm screaming in the car. Maybe screaming is maybe I was, raised voice in the car talking about those feelings. And so I'm sure whatever concern anybody had about me was definitely doubled down in that car ride. So they all kind of lovingly put me to bed. And even my kiddo Rowan, and I hope they don't mind me talking about this, but they told me a few days ago, not right away, like maybe yesterday, that they had never seen me. Like, I arrived that night. I was mad at the church. I was devastated that maybe I had hurt my kiddo in Kansas. I was like, I was definitely having a moment of sleep deprivation, disaster that last 2 hours of that evening. And they had helped me get some, they had worked with a local psychiatrist to give me like a quick consult, like telehealth consult or whatever. And I was able to get some medication. You were involved in that, I think, John. So thank you. And the only man I was willing to listen to was Joe. And he was like, you're taking it. And I'm like, okay. And everybody put me to bed.
We just wanted to get you sleep. Honestly.
And I needed it. Yeah. I wasn't saying I don't need sleep. I knew I needed sleep. And I had already taken off the week from work because I knew even back in Kansas that I was not going to be able to show up as a clinician. There was no way. So I had done that. You all put me to bed. You all got me the medicine. But it's been a week now, right? Like, today's Monday. Is that right? And I'm telling you that today was the first day that I actually left my home, like drove one of my kids to school and did, some things with my kid who needed me to pick up some like track stuff for track. And so that was interesting. I've spent most of the week in bed or in a chair, like when I do interviews I also actually put a boundary with media. I there was a part of me that, of course, wanted media attention to bring light to this, but I was like, I can't talk to media. I can barely talk to my own kids. I can't figure out what I'm going to say that makes any sense. I did give Sarah at the Washington Post a quick interview just to kind of talk about my what the results was when I got the excommunication notice, and also to let her know my response appeal letter. So I did have that interaction with her, and I also had an interaction with Fox 13 News with Haley. Oh gosh, I forget her last name, but mainly I felt comfortable with both of them because they had both reached out to me the week before, and they were both very respectful in how they took my story. So I felt like just the little snippets I can offer, I'll just offer to the two that I had already talked to. I had a very nice conversation with a gentleman from ABC News today. I think Utah ABC News. So I don't know if that story has broken yet or not, but he also was very kind, respectful. I've had really very positive interactions with the few journalists that I've talked to.
You may have just said this, and if I missed it, I'm sorry. I was looking at comments. But did Doug Fabrizio, did Radio West ask you to be on the show?
They reached out, and it was when I was like, I would love to talk to you next week.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So they did the show with Kristen Hodson, and which I thought she did a beautiful job. And also, sorry, I'm getting a phone call. I want to make sure. Can I take this really quick? It's my kiddo. Sorry.
So
I'm in the
Margie,
middle of a
what do you
podcast.
think about
Do you need anything?
Natasha's
emergency?
comments so far? Any thoughts you have you want to share?
Okay.
Let me throw it on you and put the pressure on you.
Right.
There
And
should
how
be
about
some in
you?
my-
Oh,
in my
yes,
desk
well.
area.
I want to thank all our
in the
listeners. We
bathroom.
have a very large audience that has been tuning in.
Well, it's probably only the one.
I
you
do
don't
want to
like.
invite you guys to ask any questions you have for
hammer
Natasha.
one.
Any comments or questions?
I know.
We
love
definitely
you. I gotta go.
want to
Bye.
give you a chance to ask Natasha any questions or comments that you have. So that was our song and dance.
My kiddo can't find his melatonin. I didn't realize it's 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
You probably all want to go to bed anyway. But yeah, so I definitely feel it still. I need to rest still. I'm still getting like sleep headaches. I'm still using the sleep aids that were prescribed to me.
Good.
And I'm still healing.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That doesn't mean I'm not okay. It just means I just like recovered from a surgery, right? And I need to be on bed rest for 2 weeks or something like that. It's very similar.
Yeah. It takes time.
We had a question from the audience right at the very beginning that I wanted to read. It's from Clark, and he wrote, what would Natasha say to someone who thinks or says that she was insincere about keeping her membership because she chose not to attend the membership council? Everyone should know that he wrote a letter to the stake president supporting Natasha. So he's not questioning your sincerity, but maybe there have been some people that question your sincerity and around your appeal as well, that maybe, do you really want to stay a member? Why would you want to stay a member in this church that would kick you out? And if someone were to say, isn't this just all theater? The disciplinary council's theater, the appeals theater, it's just theatrics.
Yeah.
What would you say?
I mean, I don't know what I can say. I mean, I've told my truth. I've shown my emotion. I've never taken acting classes, so I don't think you can show the type of emotion that I showed in a fake way. I know who I am. I know that those are legitimate questions. I know that and those are, I would just say kind of you do you in that regard. Like if that's the interpretation you take away from my experience, okay. It's not my job to manage everybody's reaction to my experience. And I understand where those concerns come from. Like I get it. And I'm even willing to, as possible, have conversations with people who have those concerns as I have time. Like if we want to get somebody in a podcast that feels that way and have a conversation, like I'm willing to have conversations with people, but obviously I can't do it all. So That's okay. I get it. I understand it. There were times when I felt those ways, when I was especially more of a believer person myself, more orthodox. All I can do is show up, and all you can do is decide what you're going to do with my showing up. Right?
That's right. Yep.
Any other questions you had, Mike? You were.
Is there anything you wanted to talk about that we didn't ask, or that
I can't
didn't
think
come
of anything, right? I really wanted to debrief. I wanted to ask you all some questions. I would ask the same thing of you. Is there anything that you would like to share? I mean, what was it like afterwards, or anything? I mean, I think you've shared quite a bit, but.
So if it's okay, we'll take just a couple questions from our viewing audience. We've had several hundred people just watching this whole thing. So thanks to listeners for staying tuned. Lori Bagley-Burt writes, how does Natasha feel her experience will impact our community of mental health providers, us therapists, and therapy?
Sorry, I was texting my kid. What was the question again? How does this impact the mental health professionals?
How do you feel like this will impact our community of mental health providers?
No, it's impacting us. I mean, I just attended a board meeting for the Mormon Mental Health Association on Sunday night that was pre-planned, and I had enough energy to attend, and everybody's talking, and I think one of the things that anytime there's something that's painful or bad in our lives, usually, not that we wanted those bad things to happen, but usually there's a silver lining, or there's growth, or there's new perspectives, right? And so one of the things that I think will really benefit all of us, whether you agree with me or don't agree with me, or you're a professional, or you're a member, or even outside of this community altogether, because I think this has implications actually for like ASECT and for even legislation. Like these struggles between science and religion are all over the place. Conversations about religious freedom, and it's a nationwide issue. It's just having a Mormon story in the minute, and a white Mormon story at that. I definitely want to say that. But I think the best thing that will come out of this story, I hope, is conversations. We're going to have to talk about things that we don't typically talk about. And I'm noticing those conversations with my colleagues. I'm noticing that conversation with colleagues who don't agree with me. I'm inviting them to conversations. Like I'm comfortable calling a few people out publicly because they've publicly called me out. So like Laura Brotherson and who was the gentleman who wrote the piece in Meridian magazine, which is of course a very biased LDS magazine. Was it? I forget his name, but like I'm willing to sit down with those people, right? Like let's really talk about this, and maybe let's especially talk about it with an ethics professional who isn't even Mormon, right? Who doesn't come from our. I just want conversations. I want leaders to have conversations. Would they have done this if I was in their stake? For example, the stake president, a neighboring stake president in Kansas, is also he is the dean or the director of the Marriage and Family Therapy program at Kansas State University. The stake president is the director of the Marriage and Family Therapy program. I don't know him. I think I've maybe shook hands with him once, but would he have excommunicated me? How does he teach his marriage and family therapy students that they can't talk about masturbation with their clients? Or do you see what I'm saying? That like this has implications for a lot of conversations. And I hope we really take the opportunity to have those conversations.
What do you say to the church's response that this was never about any of your clinical work with your clients? That this was about criticizing the brethren publicly and
First of all, I have the letter showing all their concerns, which are all clinical concerns, except for maybe my tone about the patriarchal prick comment. But I only call them those names because they hurt my people, right? So I don't, and I don't even really call them. I call it kind of like it's a systemic idea. Like when we act in these ways that are patriarchal, we can really harm people. So it's not like I'm calling any one person that name. in particular. So I just think that's really BS. And I think that the church has a problem with gaslighting. That's another historical problem. Oh, well, you're leaving the church. It's not because we have issues. It's because you didn't pray enough or study enough. The whole lazy learner thing, right? I mean, that's not true. We know that's not true. We know that some of the people, some people leave the church because they're just not interested in religion or it doesn't resonate with them or they just don't want to be active, even though they still believe. There's all kinds of people who don't attend church for a lot of different reasons. But a lot of the people that we communicate with, especially through Mormon Stories and through our retreats and stuff, we know that they're the people who studied the most and who were very intentional about trying to figure out how they could make, that cognitive dissonance work in a way that they could actually stay. So it's dishonest and it's a gaslighting technique for them to say, oh, no, it's not that, it's this. And they're experts at it. Their PR department is expert at that. And that's a sickness that needs to go by the wayside if they really want to retain membership. This new generation is not about authority. They should study the millennials, like their values. Yeah. Their values are authenticity and are you being real with us? Mm-hmm. Like the reason why my kids respect me is not because I'm like, you have to do it because mom says so. Mm-hmm. My kids respect me when I'm like, you know what, guys, I'm like spent. I'm not gonna be able to be your mom today. I'm so sorry. Or when I say, you know what, I think I did a She-Hulk on you guys yesterday. I was really rotten and I know I grounded you guys for like 3 days and you probably deserve 1 day. So they respect that because I'm showing up real. I'm showing up authentic. I correct my mistakes. I'm willing for them to tell me what I'm doing wrong. Like my kid in Kansas told me quite a few things that he was upset about with me over this weekend. And I'm like, bring it.
Yeah.
Bring it. Tell me. Yeah. And I owned it.
That's beautiful.
If the church can do that, they'll be much more respected and powerful. So stop gaslighting me and everybody else. Yeah. We're not stupid. We can see through those tactics. It's obvious.
Yeah.
And that's why I wanted it to be so transparent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, we're only upset with because you're critical. Well, but what am I being critical about? Oh, everything that has to do with my clinical practice. Come on. Like even Doug Fabrizio said that very well in the program. He's like, it's obviously connected.
Yeah.
Yeah, except I would just say that if there's one commonality between all the excommunications, it's the brethren don't like to be criticized publicly. I think that's actually legitimate. It's true the criticisms were about their policies, but it seemed, I guess in theory we all did that temple covenant to not criticize the Lord's anointed, and we just know they don't like to be criticized in public. They see their authority as the most sacred and valuable thing that they have.
And that's not healthy. That's not healthy. They should all read Christian Moore's book, Being Resilient. Mm-hmm. Like, I get it. Who likes to be criticized? I don't like it. Nobody likes it. It's not fun. It's not a fun process. But what are we doing in therapy? A lot of times we're helping people learn how to take some criticism constructively so that they can take a look at themselves. I mean, it's basic Freudian 101, right? Like our egos and our ids and all those things that just, we don't like to be wrong. We don't like it when people call us out on our crap. I don't like it, but I've learned to actually appreciate it.
Yeah.
And especially if it's done nicely. And I did it nicely for years.
Yeah.
It's been just recently that, like, I had the comment at the Protect LDS Children's thing where I called out Oaks on not being willing to repent as a church. Like, don't say ridiculous things if you don't want to be criticized.
Right.
Don't go against our own doctrine if you don't want to be criticized.
Yeah.
Don't do things that are obviously, like, how many mama and papa dragons need to go meet with apostles to tell them that their kids are dying of suicide and then continue your stupid stuff when you've got bajillions of dollars that you can get educated on these things. If you don't want to be criticized, like, stop being, like, actually kind of ridiculous.
Right.
Because if you're saying ridiculous things.
Right. Yeah. that are
And I
causing.
only criticize them on that. I don't ever criticize their personality or their character or their service, or, I don't say that they shouldn't be in the positions that they're in. That's what I mean by sustaining. Like, we've all done callings. We know how hard that is. We know it takes a lot of time. I respect a lot of what they do. But when you say stupid stuff, if I say stupid stuff, somebody please call me out.
Yeah.
Call me out when I say stupid stuff.
Especially when your stupid stuff impacts and makes a lot of people suffer.
A lot. And
Then,
in the name
please.
of God.
Yeah, please.
Which is that's a very delicate relationship. Mm-hmm. It's something if my boss criticizes me, but if my God is unhappy with me because you're telling me that they are, that wreaks emotional, relational, and spiritual havoc.
Right.
And I'm tired of dressing those wounds.
Yeah, I bet you are.
I am. We all are. John, you are. Margie, you are. Every professional who signed that document is. Even the professionals who think they disagree with me are tired of dressing those wounds.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say earlier, I feel like that's actually when you see anger, or when you see that sense of like feeling, tired of it. I feel like that's where it comes from.
Yeah.
It's from the suffering that you're holding all the people's stories and just feeling like, do you not hear? Why do you not hear? Right? Mm-hmm. From the clinicians.
Yeah. And Amy Heffernan, by the way, has we're going to do a whole podcast or presentation about how this is very metaphorical to being in an abusive family.
Yeah. Oh.
And Amy's moving to Salt Lake.
Woo woo.
How cool is that?
I feel bad because I know that's a struggle for her, but I'm like super happy about it.
Gerardo is asking me to ask you if you want to comment on Laura Brotherson's comments about you, kind of your fellow therapist.
I offered a post with my comments to her. I mean, basically, it's like, I knew of her basically because of her first book that she wrote, or her only book. I don't know how many books she's written, and They Were Not Ashamed. And I saw a lot of usefulness for that type of book, where she basically also talks about masturbation being helpful, but she just did it in a very, LDS languaged way. And I saw usefulness for that. And I've referred to her book many times. At the same time, it's difficult to take criticism from, especially professional criticism, with somebody who doesn't hold your own credentials. So I made the kind of like the metaphor that like a family doctor, family physician is a doctor, and a cardiologist is a doctor. They're both doctors. They both have a lot of education. They both have a lot of credentials. But if you have a cardiology issue, and the family physician and the cardiologist are having that conversation like equals, and the public thinks that they're equals, that isn't, nobody would fly for that. You'd have to have the two cardiologists having an argument, right? So that's just kind of how I feel about Laura Brotherson. She probably helps a lot of people, but in this particular area, I have more expertise and much more training than she does. That's just a reality. That's not a prideful thing. And she has actually, we've seen posts that she's written, especially around transgender issues, that are highly problematic for a therapist to be holding, that do not follow best practice. So I'm willing to have conversations with these people. But when she says she wouldn't refer to me, I'm like, well, the feeling's mutual, honey. I mean, sorry. But she's a person too, and I'm willing to respect her as a person, and I'd love to have a conversation with her someday, or anybody like her.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I think we're grateful both for, Margie, I'm grateful you were willing to come and be a part of this.
I'm grateful that you all stay up late with me, because you both go to bed early and are early risers. I'm a late bed person, and I get up late. So I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
Well, Margie, I'm glad you were able to be here. Viewers and listeners, I'm glad you were able to be here. And Natasha, I'm glad we were able to help give you a chance to kind of do a bit of a postmortem. And I'm guessing you're going to be maybe doing a couple other things.
Yeah, I'll be doing some, like I mentioned, I'll be doing some podcasts with like Jennifer Gonzalez and Amy Heffernan, and I'm going to be talking to my team, my symmetry team, and seeing maybe if we want to do something. I mean, there's lots of things that now I'm thinking about, even how to turn this whole experience into maybe a book or a project, not by myself. I can't do it all by myself, but I'm just saying networking with the right people, getting the right permission, doing it in a way that's ethical, that even I think addresses that. I really do think that in a lot of ways, whenever we're doing a Mormon story that's big like this, we do have to recognize that it's primarily a white story.
Yeah.
Especially, so how do we tell this story in a way that doesn't continue to not tell the other story of the intersectionality of our Black and brown members that not only carry sexual shame wounds in our church, but also carry wounds that most of us don't even know how to talk about or address or even recognize. So I want to be mindful. I want to be thoughtful. So it's going to take me a lot of time to figure out what all is going to come out of this. And I think consulting with the right people is going to be very important if I'm going to do it right or as right as possible.
Yeah.
Right.
Those are great insights.
So, okay.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me kind of just have a space where I felt like I could take as much time as I needed. And both prior and after, this has been a good way for me to be like, okay, now I can talk to the media. Now I can talk to whoever. But at least I got, I think, most of my Mormon story out. And the space that you provide without deadlines and things like that. So thank you both.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Natasha. And I imagine it's just going to be keep up the good work. You're going to just keep.
Oh yeah, same old, same old.
Same old, same old.
For the most part. I mean,
work continues. Right?
Yeah,
Like
I mean, the same old. Maybe my ideal idea would be like a year from now. Maybe I'm seeing 15 clients instead of 25 because I want to work on these other projects. But as far as my approach and my resources and
your commitment
presentations and all that, same old. Yeah, nothing's changing.
All right. Thanks, Natasha.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. You guys take care, and we'll see you guys again soon on another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. Bye, everybody.